Chapter 2346. You can use weapons too. Chapter 2346. You can use weapons too. Hearing Hunyo say this, both Qi Shuang and Yuan got a scare and hurriedly stopped her, fearing that Ling Han would really grill the egg in a moment of impulse and eat it. That was something that was equivalent to an ancestral weapon and had its own consciousness once it was hatched, and would definitely become ancestral king-level existence in the future. How precious was it? Ling Han couldn't help but smile. Even without Qi Shuang and Yuan stopping him, he would not let Hunyo eat the battle beast egg either. Be good, this egg is not delicious. After a few words of persuasion, Hunyo finally dismissed the idea of eating the egg with much reluctance. They went back and set out on their return journey after making some preparations. Meanwhile, Ling Han requested leave from Qi Shuang and Yuan, saying he wanted to travel the world. The two of them were very troubled by this. Ling Han had gotten first place in the elite leaderboard, and this was a great honor for the 100 Battles Academy. After they returned, there would definitely be a great celebration. The two of them were good leaders, so they would naturally feel proud as well, having gained a great honor. But if Ling Han did not return, the effects would be greatly subtracted. They tried to convince him repeatedly, but Ling Han had made his decision. In any case, his strength was clear to see. Even if Qi Shuang and Yuan used force, he could still calmly escape. Ling Han did not proceed to hatch the battle beast egg, but rather went into seclusion to meditate first, completely digesting the enlightenment he had attained in his battle with Huaijian. 3 days later, he went to the Sunset Mountains as promised. Jing Zhongyue was already waiting there. One woman and her sword, a peerless talent unmatched. There were also many people standing around them. In fact, there were even some that had no space to stand and could only remain afloat in midair. "You're late." Seeing Ling Han stroll slowly over, Jing Zhongyue spoke in displeasure. "I am too popular now and had to greet too many people on my way here. If I had ignored them, it would not have been appropriate. I feared others would say that I was putting on airs now that I was famous, and that's why I am late," Ling Han explained smilingly. Jing Zhongyue's pretty face darkened. This guy really spoke nonsense easily. She had clearly seen that Ling Han had not greeted anyone on his way here. He was clearly just playing around with her. She humphed, waved her sword, and said, "This sword of mine is a 9th Lotus level precious tool. You can also use weapons too, so others would not say that I am being a bully." "Sure then." Ling Han nodded and drew the divine demon sword without reservations. With a slight wave of his hand, the sword immediately released a soft cry as if it was an invincible king that was issuing a warning. Suddenly, the crystalline precious sword in Jing Zhongyue's hand wriggled like a snake, as if it had encountered a terrifying monster, and was trembling in fear. Jing Zhongyue was stunned. This was her precious tool, and was mentally connected to her. Hence, she sensed that the sword in her hand was afraid, and the source of its fear was precisely the sword in Ling Han's hand. Fuck, it was already afraid when the battle had not even begun. Jing Zhongyue was both angered and stunned. She quickly waved the precious sword, planning to force it into battle. Pa! A crack actually appeared in the middle of the sword in her hands, which swiftly widened, and then the sword broke in half. This! Jing Zhongyue was rendered completely speechless. Her crystal sword had actually shattered itself just because of the fear it felt towards the sword in Ling Han's hand. It would rather break itself than dare to battle. Just what kind of subjugation was this? "Ancestral weapon!" she uttered with much difficulty. Only an ancestral weapon would be capable of subjugating a 9th Lotus precious tool. It was not qualified to even battle. Then what use was there to battle? Completely unarmed, she was absolutely no match for Ling Han. At first, she had planned to get a win with her superior precious weapon, but the result was even worse now. Before the battle had even begun, she had already lost. This guy was really too lucky, wasn't he? to actually possess an ancestral weapon. Ling Han waved the sword lightly and asked smilingly, "Still want to battle?" Jing Zhongyue could say nothing. She turned around and left with a flap of her wings. There was no way that she could match Ling Han unless she could obtain an ancestral weapon. With how valuable ancestral weapons were, to say nothing of obtaining, even if it was just lending, who would be willing to lend one to her? It would be better to wait until she became an ancestral king herself. Otherwise, she would be continuously suppressed by Ling Han's ancestral weapon, and there was no way that she would be able to make a comeback. The people gathered in the mountains were all speechless. Who would have imagined that the battle of titans that they had initially anticipated would actually end in this manner? Ling Han withdrew the divine demon sword and left slowly. After returning to his quarters, Ling Han decided to first make the battle beast egg recognize him as master by dripping blood on it. Then, while it slowly hatched, he would continue to tour the foreign realm. When he had accumulated enough energy, he would then break through to the ascending origin tier. Within the Black Tower, his left hand held the battle beast egg, and he bit the index finger of his right hand. Instantly, blood dripped and landed on the battle beast egg. While reciting in his mind, Ling Han dipped his finger in the blood and began drawing on the egg. This was a seal that could help him connect to this beast egg and form a slavery contract with the living creature inside. When the seal was completed, a frightening might suddenly surge towards Ling Han, as if an incredibly terrifying beast was opening its mouth, planning to rip into him. Ling Han discovered that he was in a dark space. There was no sky above him or any ground below him. It was only a complete vacuum. But very soon, a majestic, giant creature appeared in front of him. It had the form of a fierce beast, but it was standing with 2 feet on the ground. These 2 hind legs were long and strong and took up about more than half of its size, but its 2 front paws were pitifully small, being curled up at its chest. However, its mouth was colossal, showing 2 rows of teeth that seemed like they were forged from blades, emanating an eerie glow. What kind of monster was this? Ling Han could only say that his knowledge of the creatures of the foreign realm was really too limited. But there was one thing he was sure of. This wild beast was no ordinary beast. Pa, 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 pa. The monster moved its feet and charged rapidly towards Ling Han like a human. Opening its mouth, boom, it released a terrifying sound blast that swept out towards Ling Han. Instantly, enlightenment rose up in Ling Han's mind. He presently was only in spirit form, and the monster on the other side was the same as well. It came from that battle beast that had not hatched as of yet, as expected of an existence that was fated to become an ancestral king. It was extraordinarily fierce. It already had unprecedented, ferocious might before it had even been born. It was not willing to be enslaved by Ling Han. Thus, it began an intense battle with Ling Han in the spiritual world. If it could deal Ling Han a severe injury, it could then turn the situation around. Ling Han would be the slave, and it would be the master. This kind of slavery contract was two-sided in the first place, and the stronger one would be the one who made the rules. Ling Han couldn't help but laugh loudly. This battle beast was indeed destined to become an ancestral king. Yet he was a man that would ultimately become a heavenly venerate. He greeted the incoming attack without fear, his whole body blazing with boundless flames. On the subject of slaughter, whom had he ever feared? Pum! The man and beast clashed, undergoing a solid collison, and then both were bounced backwards. This was a clash on the spiritual level, which had nothing to do with physique. The battle beast was born for battle, and would go berserk in combat. Though it had not been born yet, its violent might soared to the heavens. Immediately, it raced back with rapid movement of its large paws. Its great mouth was open, biting out at Ling Han's neck. Ling Han's physique was shocking, and his spirit was not much inferior either. He, too, rushed back with a battle cry, his strikes pouring down like rain. Pung! 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 the man and beast battled fiercely. The battle beast was incredibly mighty and violent, biting randomly with its mouth. Though its paws were small, their destructive power was extremely astonishing. Even the slightest contact could cause a heavy injury on Ling Han. They were in spirit form, and there would not be any apparent injuries, yet they would become weak. Whoever was exhausted to the extreme would then expose the core of their spirit, and the seal of slavery would thus be easily planted. Ling Han naturally was not inferior, either. With him using fists of fury continuously, the battle beast held repeatedly, its form rapidly fading. Victory was in his grasp. Chapter 2347. The Battle Beast is Born. Chapter 2347. The Battle Beast is Born. The intense battle continued for who knew how long. Finally, Ling Han got the complete upper hand, the beast wailing in pain continuously at his attacks. Its figure was also becoming fainter and fainter, revealing the core within. Ling Han grabbed it in a single stroke and instantly felt the thought of defiance and unwillingness to submit emanating from this battle beast, because it was an existence destined to become an ancestral king. Ling Han laughed loudly and sent out a message through divine sense as well. Don't feel that you are unfortunate. In the past, there were 9 source powers of heaven and earth that followed me, and which of them were not existences that would be able to become ancestral kings once they gained intelligence? As for me, my finish line is definitely not just ancestral king, nor is it heavenly venerable tier, but rather becoming a true overlord of the universe. If you follow me, it will only set you off on a path towards greater strength. Instantly, that battle beast appeared hesitant. It had not hatched, so its intelligence was no more than a 3-year-old child's. If it were not for the support of its primitive instincts, it could not possibly have attacked Ling Han, either. With Ling Han's persuasive words now, its resolve was naturally swayed. Ling Han did not rush it, either, and merely waited patiently. After a while, the battle beast opened its core on its own volition and let down its guard completely against Ling Han. Ling Han stretched out a finger and pressed down, planting his own mark on the core of the battle beast's consciousness. Instantly, a certain special connection was formed between him and this battle beast. It was very hard to describe what kind of feeling this was. It was like his body had gained another limb that he could freely move, yet this limb had its own self-consciousness and executed his commands completely once he issued them. No matter how unreasonable or dangerous this command was. "How do I hatch you?" Ling Han asked via divine sense. "The regulations of the great Tao nurture me the best. So, Master, you only need to use your power of regulation to cultivate me, and I will be born very quickly. The stronger the regulations you supply are, and the wider the variety, the sooner my birth will be," the battle beast said. Ling Han gave an "O." "I have to give you a name." If the Empress and the others were present, they would definitely try to stop him with their best efforts. This guy really had no standards in terms of coming up with names. It would be something like Little White, Little Black, Little Ching, or Little Gray. This battle beast was an existence that was destined to become an ancestral king. If some hideous name was given to it, it would definitely be teased to death in future. Too bad this battle beast did not know that, and still very happily exclaimed, "Please bestow a name on me, Master." Though it had not hatched yet, it was already equipped with preliminary intelligence, but this time it had clearly gone blind. "I'll call you Little Terror, then." Ling Han said, "With how terrifying you look, this is not a bad name. In the future, you will be responsible for scaring people for me." It was a pity that this little beast did not understand at all, and was still cheering there happily, celebrating the fact that it now had a name. When it hatched, it would truly develop its own intelligence, and it would probably feel extremely depressed about its rash actions today at that time. "I'll go out first, and I will hatch you as soon as possible." Ling Han withdrew from the spiritual world, and then used the power of regulation to nurture this little guy with his arms around the beast egg. This time, it was not for the sake of battle. Ling Han extracted the power of regulation in a gentle manner, and it was all the regulations together at that, offering the best nurturing conditions for this battle beast. "Master, you have actually grasped so many regulations!" the little guy exclaimed in shock, communicating this to Ling Han through divine sense. "Going by the look of things, I will be born in 3 years at most." Ling Han nodded and activated the greatest eternity everlasting physique after he advanced to the 11th secret. His physique evolved from greatest eternity immortal physique into greatest eternity everlasting physique, which was much stronger than the former. He used time acceleration on himself, and the effects were not the least bit inferior to those of the time cultivation chambers outside. In fact, they were far superior because what he needed to accelerate was only himself. The burden was naturally countless times smaller, and the effects also increased madly. After cultivating this kind of physique, he actually would no longer need to use any time cultivation chamber. 3 years' time passed in the blink of an eye. A crack appeared on the eggshell with a crisp sound, and the crack widened quickly afterwards. The number of cracks also increased, endlessly spreading out. When the number of cracks had reached as many as over a dozen, a black paw suddenly stretched out of the crack and ripped it apart. With that, the egg shell broke apart like it had dried and aged. A small beast leaped out. It was completely black as ink and only had a pair of ruby-like eyes. It looked exactly the same as the great monster that Ling Han had seen in the spiritual world. It was just countless times smaller. ADN was only a foot tall now. On the surface, it looked completely harmless, and instead seemed dumb and cute. The little beast saw Ling Han and immediately approached, rubbing its head against Ling Han's calf. When it rubbed its head against him, Ling Han almost lost his footing and fell onto the ground. The little guy's brute power was extraordinarily shocking, though it was also because Ling Han was taken off guard. How could he have been affected if there had not been enough power? Ling Han crouched down and said to the little beast, "Little terror, you are very impressive." "Ayo, ayo." The little beast opened its mouth and released what sounded like the howls of a wolf. Ling Han couldn't help but be dumbfounded. What part of this guy looked like a wolf that it actually let out such sounds? Could it be that its father had an inappropriate relationship with a female wolf, and thus such a little guy was born? If the little guy did not speak through divine sense, it would be no different than an infant that had just been born. Its calls were extremely childish, so cute that it would melt anyone's heart. Ling Han couldn't help but feel gloomy. He was such a mighty and dominant man. If he led such a little guy in public openly, would others look down on him? However, the brute force that the little guy displayed at birth was incredibly shocking. It was almost at the ascending origin tier already, so if it grew for a while longer, reaching the power of Celestial King tier would be just around the corner. But if it only had brute force and did not have the support of corresponding regulations, it would still be useless. "Come, let me see your strength," Ling Han said, and tossed out a piece of pseudo-divine metal. It had been left behind after the divine demon sword had advanced to the level of a celestial tool. Little Terror stretched out its front paw and swiped at this piece of pseudo-divine metal. Z! An ear-piercing sound rang out, causing Ling Han to feel great discomfort in his ears. However, his eyes lit up because a groove about half an inch deep had immediately appeared on the pseudo-divine metal where the little guy's claws had swiped. This was astonishing. The little guy hadn't used much force at all, and merely swiped out casually at the pseudo-divine metal. Though this was only a 3-star pseudo-divine metal, it could still prove that the little beast did not just have strength, but also indeed had astonishing destructive power. Ling Han took out another piece of pseudo-divine metal. This time, it reached the height of 6 stars. The little beast swiped its claws again, and a piercing sound rang out. A fine line was left behind on the 6-star pseudo-divine metal, but it was not very obvious. This angered the little beast. Its ruby-like eyes shone with a violent light as it charged forwards and randomly bit the pseudo-divine metal. When it loosened its jaws, this pseudo-divine metal was already damaged and tattered. So powerful. Ling Han tried again and discovered that the limit of destructive power for the little beast was 7 stars pseudo-divine metal. It could damage it, but would need to expend a lot of power, and faced with 8 stars pseudo-divine metal, it could do nothing at all. This was already extremely terrifying. It should be known that the little guy had just been hatched. If it matured even further, just what kind of astonishing destructive power would it have? Ling Han studied the little guy's claws closely. Upon the first look, they were just black scales and hard armor. But if he studied it closer, he discovered that they were covered with seals. Green or blue. Just like in Japanese, there's a word that means both those colors and another separate for green. But it's the former here. By the way, it's not uncommon to use such names as those 4 for pets in China. Chapter 2348, very shocking. Chapter 2348, very shocking. Ling Han tested the little beast's defenses as well, and was stunned once more. The little guy's defense was also shockingly strong, capable of matching 7-star pseudo-divine metal, which was the same level as its destructive power. No wonder this little guy would be called a battle beast. It had a combination of frightening destructive power and defense, and was born specifically for the purpose of bloodshed and destruction. Ling Han couldn't help but think that there were war soldiers in the dark inverse realm, and the foreign realm had battle beasts. Was this a race that the foreign realm had given rise to for the sake of its own protection? After all, they were already at the ascending origin tier from birth. This was too shocking, and did not match the normal pattern of heaven and earth, either. Powerful strength should be attained only through hard work, and not be something that one was born with, a harvest that was reaped without sowing. Hence, if battle beasts were born by the foreign realm for the sake of self-protection and to stand against the war soldiers, this would actually be a very logical deduction. Ling Han exited the Black Tower and planned to ask Wally some questions. Wow, what a cute puppy! When they saw Little Terror, all the women's eyes lit up, looking like they wanted to pounce at any moment. Ling Han couldn't help but sweat madly. These women really should not see any adorable things, especially when they could not give birth to their own babies. Because of that, they had even less immunity to cute things. Furthermore, did this look like a puppy? What was wrong with your eyes? It looks quite delicious. Hunyo stroked her chin as she set her eyes on the little beast, already about to drool. Only she was different from the rest. Sensing Hunyo's animosity, Little Terror immediately turned to look at her. It bared its mouth, revealing 2 rows of snow-white teeth. In adulthood, it was extremely ferocious with those 2 rows of teeth looking like blades, and would cause a chill to rise up in anyone's heart, but at present, it could not look ferocious at all. Instead, others would only think that it was extremely cute and adorable. It was just like when a little puppy that had just been born was showing its rage, who would be afraid. Ling Han laughed involuntarily and said, "Nyo, calm down. This little guy is very fierce." Hunyo was naturally unafraid and snorted. "Just a little guy. Nyo doesn't think it can even fill my stomach." Ayo! Little Terror released a roar and howled at Hunyo, but it was very childish and did not seem at all threatening. The women couldn't help but laugh loudly, feeling that this little guy was really so fun to play around with. "Come, let big sister hug you." Bewitching Maiden Ro stretched out her hand. Little Terror was furious. It was no pet, but rather a battle beast, born purely for the sake of battle. Cuteness had absolutely nothing to do with it. Ayo! It released another howl, but it was not out of rage this time, but rather because Ling Han was scratching its neck with a finger, which made it feel great comfort. The little guy looked plaintively at Ling Han. "I am a mighty battle beast, not a pet." Ayo! It had not expected that the women would also rush forwards and would rub it repeatedly, making the little guy so comfortable that its tail was stretched straight, and its gaze was even more adorable now. "I am a battle beast. Battle beast. Battle beast, you bastards." The little guy's tummy was exposed. It was completely unguarded, allowing the women to ravage it as they liked. Of course, this was also because it knew that these were all its mistresses and did not dare to resist. Otherwise, if anyone else had dared to bully it like this, the little guy would have long since exploded. It obediently took on the role of pet for the women to play with. In any case, it would not be hurt with its tough hide. Ling Han went off to seek out Wally. What relation do battle beasts have with war soldiers? Ling Han asked directly. Wally searched his memories and replied, "Battle beasts should be creatures that this realm has created to oppose the war soldiers of our realm. They possess the unique traits of high defense and high destructive power, and that is for the purpose of destroying the war soldiers of our realm. However, the heaven and earth could not possibly interfere too much, and added with the extreme difficulty of reproduction of battle beasts, they have long since disappeared and can be considered a failed attempt of the heaven and earth." Ling Han was curious and asked, "Then which of the two is stronger?" "If they were of the same level, it would naturally be the battle beast that was stronger," Wally immediately said. "However, the number of battle beasts cannot compare to the number of war soldiers. A single war soldier may not be a match for the former, but they could attack in a group of 10, 20, or even 100 all at the same time." Ling Han nodded. Why had battle beasts gone extinct, and why could they now only be found in an ancient tomb? It was because this was an attempt that could not be emulated, and that was why they had been eliminated by the heaven and earth, the latter no longer willing to expend further energy on this aspect. However, though battle beasts had been eliminated, it did not mean that this kind of creature was not strong. It was just that their numbers were too low and could not have extensive effects. "You actually have a battle beast." Wally appeared slightly surprised. The expression of surprise was merely a slight widening of his mouth on his wooden face, but it was already a very impressive feat to actually manage to cause him to feel surprise. "No need to admire me. I know I am very awesome," Ling Han said, smiling. Wally looked at Little Terror. His eyes lit up with a green light and began to scan Little Terror up and down. "Roar!" Sensing this kind of green light, Little Terror immediately flipped over and stood up. It fixed its eyes on Wally, exploding with terrifying, ferocious might. It did not know Wally, but the light that he emitted caused it to instinctively feel discomfort, or even fury. The moment this ferocious might was revealed, the women all got a scare, and only then did they know that this little guy actually had such a dominant side to it. For better or worse, it is still a battle beast, after all. Ling Han deliberately stepped back a little, and did not stop Little Terror from attacking. He was extremely curious about Wally's small world. The latter could absorb even one of the essence powers of a Genesis world, void particle energy. What kind of freak was this? Wally did not react, and continued scanning Little Terror. Little Terror was completely enraged now. Since Ling Han did not stop it, its bloodthirst as a battle beast immediately exploded. Tongue, it moved its two hind legs. It was very strong and powerful. Even though its feet were tiny, it had astonishing explosive power. Xiao! It instantly rushed in front of Wally, and then stretched out its claws, which swiped outwards. Wally stepped back, but his feet did not move. Instead, his whole person simply slid back like that, which was extremely bizarre. However, this kind of evasive method was extremely efficient. No matter how Little Terror attacked him, he would always manage to dodge in time. Ling Han's eyes lit up. What Wally was using should be regulations of space, but they were not regulations of space, which was extremely strange. This was the power of heaven and earth that was superior to regulations. Regulations were manifested from the power of heaven and earth, and actually belonged to the power of heaven and earth as well. But when cultivators battled, they would have to first draw on regulations and convert them into attack power or speed. There was a process of conversion. No matter how fast this process was, it would still need time. Hence, Wally would have the chance to dodge. Of course, aside from Wally, others would also need to use regulations for evasion. This similarly had a process of conversion. In that case, there was no visible advantage. As Ling Han studied, he actually could also use a sliver of the power of heaven and earth, and that was thanks to his body that had been tempered by void particle energy. He could directly draw on his own power and would not need to stimulate regulations first to convert them into either attack power or speed. Theoretically, though my power is only at the pinnacle of the ascending origin tier, my battle prowess should not be limited to that if I could fully make use of my advantage, he mused. As expected, having Little Terror battle Wally was a wise decision. Wally soon stopped the scanning green light. While calmly dodging Little Terror's attacks, he said to Ling Han, "This battle beast has very strong genes and is worth nurturing." Though a battle beast would definitely become a celestial king, there were still 9 heavens in celestial king tier. Chapter 2349. Huai Jian's Invitation. Chapter 2349. Huai Jian's Invitation. In the area of analysis, Ling Han was only impressed with Wally. Since the latter said that Little Terror was worth nurturing, then it was definitely worth nurturing. Ling Han couldn't help but rub his chin. Could he find a female for this kind of powerful battle beast so that it could have a bunch of kids and let him build a powerful troop of battle beasts? However, the little guy had just hatched. It was a little inappropriate to have such ideas about it now. Never mind, never mind. He'd wait and see when it was older. Little Terror seemed to have sensed Ling Han's gaze and involuntarily shuddered. It looked towards Ling Han, its gaze plaintive. Ling Han laughed loudly. With a mere thought, the little guy immediately stopped obediently and made no further move to attack. He picked the little guy up and then took out a great number of alchemical pills and celestial medicines. "Come, little guy, eat some more so you can grow up quickly." His eyes shone, already planning to use Little Terror like a stud. Hold on, was the little guy male or female? He couldn't help but turn his eyes to the spot between the legs of the little guy, causing the little guy to break out in an involuntary shudder as it clamped its legs together tightly. "Even if you are my master, you cannot peep on my private areas." This little guy can't have developed wariness, right? It would be reluctant even if I had it mate in the future. "Little guy, that is a fun activity. What kind of mood are you having?" "True, it is still too young. It will change in future." "Bah." Right at this moment, a voice rang out from outside. Ling Han heard it and couldn't help but appear slightly surprised. A dashing, incredibly handsome young man of the angel race stood outside his door. He had a captivating demeanor as well, and others would feel the urge to worship him. "Huai Jian?" Ling Han nodded and asked, "There weren't any residual effects, right?" The other had broken through to the 9th lotus in a state of severe injury. The slightest accident could cause a serious Dao injury, which would be a great problem. Huai Jian cracked a smile. "I do indeed have some injuries, but I see them as a kind of grinding stone. After I erase this Dao injury, my battle prowess will be further boosted." Ling Han's eyes involuntarily narrowed, and he said, "You actually can completely expel your internal injuries, right?" Huai Jian was taken aback slightly, and only then replied, "You have guessed correctly. That is indeed the case." This guy was really mad that he would actually dare to deliberately leave an internal injury inside his body when he was breaking through, just to temper himself. Ling Han pondered. Even he would not dare to mess around like that. That was completely playing with fire. But it could not be denied that if Huai Jian had really destroyed that Dao injury with his own powerful determination and willpower, his battle prowess would indeed have been raised to a frightening height. True, he wanted to surpass Ling Han, so he would definitely have to use a method that was not normal. That was because they had already reached the normal limits, or even far surpassed them long ago. To further improve from the limits, they could only resort to extreme methods. There was actually not much difference between a prodigy and a maniac. Ling Han smiled and said, "Have you sought me out for another fight?" His fighting spirit was very strong. Sparring with an elite like Huai Jian was greatly beneficial for him. Huai Jian shook his head. "I am already in 9th Lotus, but you are only in the 8th Lotus. If I exchanged blows with you, that would be an unjust victory. When you advance to the 9th Lotus, we will battle again." "All right." Ling Han did not force the matter. Monarch stars were naturally proud. What more when it was Huai Jian? "I have sought you out today just to ask if you have the interest to take Lord Desolate Eternity as master with me." Huai Jian said solemnly. "Lord Desolate Eternity?" Ling Han appeared, slightly surprised. Who was this now? Huai Jian was also surprised and asked, "Could it be that you don't know who Lord Desolate Eternity is?" Ling Han scratched his head. "I really don't." Huai Jian shook his head. "Lord Desolate Eternity is a heavenly venerate." "Oh, so this was a heavenly venerate of the foreign realm." Ling Han chuckled and said, "How could a heavenly venerate possibly take me as a disciple?" Huai Jian shook his head and said, "You are being too modest here. Your aptitude has far surpassed that of a great majority of descendants of heavenly venerates. If you still couldn't gain the serious notice of a heavenly venerate, I would not be able to bring myself to introduce you, either." A heavenly venerate did not have many descendants, but because his bloodline was too powerful, it was extremely easy for monarch stars to emerge from his bloodline, ones that could attain up to the height of 18th Lotus Ancestral King, but they could not even dream of being capable of going beyond the threshold of the Ancestral Kings. At the very least, there had never been a legend of two heavenly venerates emerging from the same line in the foreign realm. However, there was still difference in strength among monarch stars, just like in the promised battle between the foreign realm and celestial realm, when Ji Wuming was practically capable of matching Qi Shui. Furthermore, it was in a situation when the former was inferior by a minor level at that. Qi Shui was a monarch star and was also a descendant of heavenly venerate Qi Yan. But even then, so what? In a battle of equals, Ji Wuming would definitely win. Ling Han's brain immediately became active. Should he agree? Actually, he very much wanted to come in contact with a heavenly venerate, since he, too, wanted to step into this threshold. If he came in contact with it beforehand, it would be easier for him to have a clear glimpse of the path that lay ahead of him. But the problem here was this. With the insight of a heavenly venerate, would his heaven-deceiving technique be capable of deceiving him? Hold on, didn't he have Wally? Ling Han paused silently and said, "Allow me to consider. Could I give you a reply tomorrow?" Huai Jian was unbelievably stunned. He still had to consider this. Fuck! This was sending you to become the disciple of a heavenly venerate, not demanding that you go to the battlefield. How many monarch stars were there that wanted this opportunity but were not granted it? And you actually said that you wanted to consider. If it had to be anyone considering, it should be heavenly venerate Desolate Eternity. If it were not for the fact that Huai Jian admired Ling Han very much and had a strong wish to defeat this opponent in the future, and thus did not wish that Ling Han was too weak, he would definitely have turned around and left by now. All right then, he agreed. When Huai Jian had left, Ling Han immediately called Wally over and questioned him. "You want to fool an existence that has a vitality index over 15,000. Wally's eyes lit up and dimmed, seeming to be going through the process of calculation and deduction. After a while he said, "No way, you cannot do it." Ling Han couldn't help but sigh. It looked like his hope of getting in close contact with a heavenly venerate was going to be fruitless. However, if I help you do some modifications, you should be able to do so. Who would have expected Wally would come around with a major turn of events? Ling Han couldn't help but break in a cold sweat. Could it be that Wally had been influenced by him and had now learned to joke around as well? "Teach me," he said. Wally did not immediately teach him, but rather asked him to teach him the heaven-deceiving technique, which he would then modify further. Ling Han exerted time acceleration effects on him. Half a day later, Wally's eyes snapped open. "It's done." He nodded and his eyes shone. Teaching the modified heaven deceiving technique through formulae and models, he said, "This is also slightly helpful for me, allowing me to better conceal myself, so I will not collect payment from you." Right. This guy hadn't changed in the slightest. Ling Han looked at these formulae and models and felt a headache coming on, but Wally would only display the cultivation technique in this format. In his eyes, the world was like this. It was a massive model, and this giant model could be further divided into countless formulae. Everything had a logic that could be traced. Ling Han ignored that first. Not only did he memorize these formulae and models, the women were no exception, either. Primarily, it was the Empress who Niu and Bewitching made in Row. For the other women, their cultivation levels were too low, so there was not much meaning for them to cultivate the heaven-deceiving technique, as they would not be able to fool many people. They had best just obediently stay inside the Black Tower. A day passed, and when Huai Jian came again, Ling Han nodded decisively. "Sure, let's go together." Huai Jian couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. He was not begging Ling Han here. "Did you feel so very unfortunate to become a disciple of a heavenly venerate?" Chapter 2350, Divine Desolate Mountain. Chapter 2350, Divine Desolate Mountain. Because Ling Han said he would go with Huai Jian to heavenly venerate desolate eternity, Yuan and Qi Shuang naturally had no further right to refuse him, and could only send Ling Han on his way with eyes filled with envy. But what made them even depressed was the fact that even the Empress who Niu and Bewitching made in Row ran off with him. Two of them were monarch stars and would be able to gain further honor for 100 Battles Academy in future. Yet did they dare to contend with a heavenly venerate over them? Ling Han and his group set out. Huai Jian naturally knew the way and led their group. On their journey, they used transfer formations to cover the distance. Wally still took the form of an ornament hanging from the corner of Ling Han's robes. He had also used the heaven-deceiving technique, his skill of concealing himself having improved greatly. About 7 years passed, and they finally arrived at their destination. This was an incredibly majestic great mountain, so tall that one could only look up at it. There were clouds of various colors entwined around the mountain, exuding a boundless air of majesty and austerity, and making others only want to fall to their knees in worship. It was like there was a heavenly venerate seated there. This was Divine Desolate Mountain, and also the place of enlightenment of that heavenly venerate desolate eternity. Heavenly venerates varied in their personalities. Some heavenly venerates kept an incredibly low profile. It was not even impossible that no one knew that they existed. Some heavenly venerates kept a very high profile, and their reputation spread far and wide, intimidating the rest of the world. Not only did this heavenly venerate desolate eternity keep a high profile, he was also very fond of accepting disciples. He had more than 30 disciples under his name, but it was like there was a curse. The heavenly venerate could not give rise to another heavenly venerate through his teachings. Every heavenly venerate in history had walked the path of the strongest with their own power, and for those disciples of heavenly venerates, their highest accomplishment would only be limited to 18th Lotus Ancestral King. Though it was possible that they would be incredibly strong and very close to the height of pseudo-heavenly venerable tier. Of course, prodigies would never admit defeat. Take Huai Jian, for example. His goal was definitely to become a heavenly venerate. Yet why would he then take the heavenly venerate desolate eternity as a master? Because he was confident that he could break the curse. Actually, every single monarch star had that kind of confidence, but there had ultimately been none that could break this curse. They only increased the weight of this curse further and further. Ling Han naturally did not believe it, either. Otherwise, why would he have come? Only one thing was clear, and that was that attaining heavenly venerable tier was really, really difficult. They ascended the mountain. Ling Han and his group had long since learned the newly modified heaven-deceiving technique. According to Wally, not even a heavenly venerate could possibly see through it. Meanwhile, Little Terror had not grown at all in these years, still looking dumbly cute. However, its battle prowess had increased considerably. Now it was mere child's play for it to chew through 7 stars pseudo-divine metal, and faced with 8 stars pseudo-divine metal, it could still manage to create a mark. The moment they entered the mountainous area, they had lost all sense of direction. They felt like they were surrounded by fog everywhere and could not even see the fingers on their own hands. Not only was it sight, even their hearing and divine sense had been sealed altogether. Huai Jian took out a small pendant, but the moment he took it out, it expelled the fog, and they could now see in a limited range of at least 30 meters. "This is the token bestowed by Lord Desolate Eternity," he explained to Ling Han and the others. Thai were just about to set out when they all stopped, and Little Terror, who was in bewitching Maiden Rose arms, bared its teeth, exposing its ferocious nature. "I am Huai Jian, and have come to pay a visit by the command of Lord Desolate Eternity." Huai Jian cupped his fists in greeting. "So you are Huai Jian." A voice rang out from ahead of them, but they could not see the speaker. The other was more than 30 meters away from them. "Though Master has plans to take you as a disciple, why have you brought a group of people that have no business here?" that person continued, carrying an overbearing tone. Huai Jian replied, "This man's name is Ba, and he is the first place holder of the elite leaderboard of the 1000 Academy tournament this time. He is astonishingly talented in cultivation. I know Lord Desolate Eternity is most fond of nurturing the especially talented members of the younger generation, and have thus deliberately brought him here for Lord Desolate Eternity to take a look." First place of the elite leaderboard. The person on the opposing side released a scoff. "A tournament that we, the heirs of a heavenly venerate, have not taken part in is nothing but child's play, and you actually have the face to make such a declaration." He paused and continued, "Huai Jian, don't think that you can forget yourself just because Master has taken notice of you. It should be known that you will only be one of the 37 disciples that Master has taken. Moreover, you are not a disciple yet." Huai Jian couldn't help but look furious, and said, "Whether Lord Desolate Eternity wishes to take Ba as a disciple or not is naturally to be decided by Lord Desolate Eternity. Is there any need for you to make the decision here? How dare you?" The person on the other side finally showed himself. This was a youth of the demon race. He had 4 horns on his head, which just happened to point in the 4 directions of north, south, east, and west. They were more than a foot long, which was extremely interesting. Hunyo couldn't help but set her eyes on his horns, clicking her tongue in amazement as she continued staring. That member of the demon race was displeased by her gaze and couldn't help but shout, "What are you looking at?" "Looking at how ugly you are." Hunyo exclaimed, "Fuck!" Killing intent immediately appeared on that demon's face. With a wave of his right hand, a battle spear 6 meters long appeared in his grasp. Wielding the battle spear, he stabbed it right at Hunyo without a second word. This spear strike was fast, accurate, and ruthless, bearing terrifying killing intent and might, which was enough to kill any ordinary 9th Lotus Elite. Because he was a 9th Lotus First Leaf Monarch Star, he had the battle prowess of the peak stage of a 9th Lotus Second Leaf. Hunyo had not even moved when Little Terror released a roar and darted out of bewitching Maiden Rose arms, biting out at that battle spear. This was its mistress, and now that someone had made a move to attack her, it, as a loyal dog, naturally had to charge out in the lead. Now that it was on the topic, this mistress kept drooling as she stared at it. It actually did not very much want to leap out, but who asked it to be so loyal? With a clamp, Little Terror bit the battle spear and was not letting go. Dumbfounded, the demon on the other side couldn't help but watch with shock. He was a monarch star, a 9th Lotus first leaf monarch star, and those that could suppress him, aside from ancestral kings, would only have to be someone with battle prowess on the level of the 9th Lotus third leaf. But no matter how he looked at it, this newly born battle cub could not possibly be that kind of existence. However, his battle spear had fallen into the mouth of this little beast that looked so incredibly cute, and it was like it had grown roots. It could not be moved in the slightest, and no matter how hard or strongly he pulled, it was still useless. Hiss, this little beast's power was too terrifying, wasn't it? Little Terror showed its might. With a crack, it forcefully ripped through the battle spear. That demon took several steps back, his face filled with shock. It should be known that this battle spear was 7 stars pseudo-divine metal, practically close to the toughness he had when he was on full power defense. But Little Terror had still forcefully bitten through it. Just how unbelievable was that? Even if Little Terror had the upper hand, it had no plans to spare the opponent. It pounced one more and launched a powerful offensive at that demon. The demon hurriedly parried, but because of his wariness of the sharpness of Little Terror's fangs, he actually did not dare to parry head-on and could only continuously retreat as he battled. Huaijian couldn't help but feel shocked. That demon was a 9th Lotus first leaf, just like him. Though he was a supreme monarch star, and the demon might not be, the latter had cultivated a much longer time on the level of 9th Lotus than Huaijian had. Thus, the battle prowess of the two of them was actually more or less the same. In other words, if it had been him, it would probably have been the same result. So this was that battle beast egg. Even if Huaijian had always believed firmly in his own strength, he couldn't help but show a sliver of envy. Originally, it had been prepared for him, yet now it had become Ling Han's battle pet. This thought merely flashed past in his mind before disappearing. He was filled with confidence in himself once more. As long as he erased the Dao injury in his body, a great boost would take place in his battle prowess, and he would definitely be capable of suppressing Ling Han. Chapter 2351 Jealousy. Chapter 2351 Jealousy. I refuse to believe this, that demon roared in fury. How could I, Si Huangyan, lose to a baby beast? From first look, he could tell that Little Terror had not been born very long ago. Its flame of life had only been burning for a limited period of time. If he lost a Little Terror, he would really become a massive joke. In the future, he would never be able to raise his head high and face others. He attacked madly, but Little Terror was a battle beast. The heaven and earth had given rise to it purely for the sake of battle. There was no need for it to learn anything else at all in future. It only had to act on its instincts. The little guy had a tough hide, practically reaching the height of 8 stars pseudo-divine metal, which could more or less ignore Si Huangyan's attacks, yet its attacks were incredibly harsh. As its tiny claws flourished, Si Huangyan's defense melted like snow that had encountered fire. This naturally made Si Huangyan extremely uncomfortable, and he continuously evaded, appearing very battered and exhausted. Only now did the Empress and the others truly know how powerful Little Terror could be. They were all stunned, and even Hunyo was pouting. Though she was an 11th secret monarch star, with her battle prowess comparable to small accomplishment of the ascending origin tier, she was not just a bit away from being capable of matching an opponent at great accomplishment of the ascending origin tier. There were 3 levels in the ascending origin tier, but there was a massive gap between each level. Even a monarch tier could only be invincible in a battle of equal cultivation levels. Only a monarch star could overcome the gap in cultivation level and crush a superior opponent. But Hunyo had not advanced to the ascending origin tier yet, so she could only vanquish all those at small accomplishment level of the ascending origin tier. Nyo will work hard on cultivation and advance into the ascending origin tier as soon as possible, then eat meat. This glutton's fiery fighting spirit was immediately ignited. For the sake of eating, she could suffer. Si Huang Yun roared in fury. He really could not suppress Little Terror. The little guy was a born war machine, a tool for bloodshed. Acting cute was definitely not its strength. "Stop," he shouted. If they continued fighting, he would lose, and it would be a terrible defeat. Ling Han merely chuckled, and did not say a word, having absolutely zero intention to call a halt to events. Huai Jian, too, crossed his arms over his chest, acting like he had not heard anything. Monarch stars like them all had great pride. Si Huangyin actually dared to treat them so lightly, which naturally made them very displeased. How could they not let him have a little suffering? When the robes covering Si Huangyin's arms and thighs had all become torn and tattered, only then did Huai Jian say to Ling Han, "Brother Ba, that's about enough, right?" Ling Han was still not satisfied. Sending out a thought, Little Terror immediately stopped attacking and leaped backwards to return. It then curled up again in bewitching Maiden Rose arms, as obedient as if it was a dog. Si Huangyin panted harshly. Now he was really battered and exhausted. His initially lavish robes were now torn and tattered. He looked no different than a beggar. He glared harshly at Little Terror, which was immediately sensed by the creature, and the latter glared back angrily at him. Its mouth was again opened, revealing 2 rows of tiny fangs. Si Huangyin turned his head and looked towards Ling Han. This was the real culprit. "If you want to become Master's disciple, are you just going to depend on this beast pet?" he demanded proudly. He could lose a battle, but definitely could not lose face. Ling Han couldn't help but grin. "What is it? Are you jealous that I have something you don't?" Si Huangyin humphed. He was a man that was destined to become an 18th Lotus ancestral king. Would he care about a mere beast pet? But it could not be denied that this beast pet was really very frightening. He was already a monarch star himself, yet was still no match for this beast pet. Was this little guy going to defy the heavens? "Fight me, and if you can parry 100 moves from me, I will inform Exalted Master of your arrival." He stated his condition. Huai Jian flew into a rage. He was also a very proud man and had always kept his word. He said that he would make introductions for Ling Han, yet the other man was obstructing them in all form and manner and established conditions. This was an insult to him. Was he trying to take them a notch down? His eyes narrowed. On this matter, he was in the same boat as Ling Han. "Si Huangyin, do you even have face? Ba is only an 8th Lotus 11th leaf, yet you are a 9th Lotus first leaf. How is he supposed to fight you?" he shouted. Yet Si Huangyin showed absolutely no hint of embarrassment and stated calmly, "I do not demand that he defeat me. It is merely parrying 100 strikes. If he can't do even that, what right does he have to become Master's disciple? I will fight with you," Huai Jian declared. "You?" Si Huangyin chuckled. "If you can parry 100 strikes from me, you naturally can also go to meet Master, but you cannot substitute for him." He pointed at Ling Han. Ling Han said smilingly, "I hate it the most when others point their finger at me." "So what about it?" Si Huangyin demanded arrogantly. "Then I'll just close the doors and let the dog out." With a thought from Ling Han, Ling Terror immediately charged out again and pounced at Si Huangyin. Pung, pung, pung. The moment the little guy was in battle, it was crazy. It would be ripping, biting, and chewing, completely aiming to dismember Si Huangyin. "You are shameless!" Si Huangyin hurriedly dodged left and right. He was deliberately bullying Ling Han, wanting to use his superior advantage of a major tier to deal with the latter. But he had not expected that Ling Han would not be falling for it at all. Instead, the latter had Little Terror step out in his place, which instantly made him feel very wounded. Pieces of fabric flew and scattered, and there was less and less cloth covering Si Huangyin. What should or should not be revealed was all exposed. Furthermore, Little Terror had also bitten his legs and behind a few times. Its teeth marks were distinct, and blood was dripping as Si Huangyin continuously let out yowls of pain. Actually, he was not someone with a weak will. Even if his bones broke and tendons tore, he would not even frown. But now his behind was being bitten by a wild beast. This feeling was completely different. Moreover, Little Terror's teeth were really too sharp, causing bone-deep pain with every bite. Ha 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 ha, junior brother Si Huangyin, why do you look so battered? Amidst a laugh, another person walked out. However, this time it was a youth of the angel race. Similarly, a 9th lotus was clear on his forehead. He was also a first leaf. Si Huangyin was tired from dodging, and could not even muster up the strength to refute him. However, his face was flushed red in extreme embarrassment and fury. This angel smiled at Huai Jian and said, Junior brother Huai Jian, I am Feng Hailuan, Exalted Master's 32nd disciple. Greetings, senior brother Feng. Huai Jian also cupped his fists to pay respects. Feng Hailuan looked at Little Terror with envy. So this is the gift that Exalted Master has bestowed on junior brother? Even I am envious. He had heard of primordial battle beasts before, though he was also very tempted and wanted to possess one. Would he dare speak of this to the heavenly venerate? Realization dawned on Huai Jian. No wonder Si Huangyin had verbally caused trouble for them from the very beginning. As it turned out, the reason lay here. Jealousy. He smirked coldly in his heart. A great monarch star would actually spend his energy on fits of jealousy. How is he then to ascend to the pinnacle of cultivation? No wonder the heavenly venerate could not cultivate another heavenly venerate from his disciples. Part of the reason was that these disciples had focused their efforts on contending for his favor. If they had a determination to become a heavenly venerate, what need would there be to be concerned about external factors like a battle beast? After becoming a heavenly venerate, what could they not obtain? Huai Jian shook his head with a smile and replied, This battle beast is not mine, but rather belongs to Brother Ba. N. Feng Hailuan was surprised before showing a hint of displeasure. What our exalted master has bestowed on junior brother has actually passed on to another. Fuck, you are really too generous. Not even I have something so precious. Even if you had wanted to pass it to someone else, you should have passed it to another disciple of heavenly venerate desolate eternity. What do you mean by giving it to an outsider? That's not it, Huai Jian said with a smile. This is what Brother Ba has won with his own abilities. He related the matter of the battle for the first place of the elite leaderboard, and admitted frankly that he had indeed lost to Ling Han, though the gap between them was really pitifully small. Feng Hailuan's eyes lit up. Ba, right? Let us have a battle, and if you lose, you will have to give this battle beast over to me. Chapter 2352, Beaten Until Bursting. Chapter 2352, Beaten Until Bursting. This was really too shameless. What was Feng Hailuan's cultivation level? He was a 9th lotus first leaf, and a monarch star at that. As for Ling Han, an 8th lotus 11th leaf. Even if they were both monarch stars, wasn't there still a gap of a major tier between the two of them? Even if the 11th leaf could barely be considered a 9th lotus, Feng Hailuan would still have the advantage of a minor level. What monarch star could defeat another monarch star with the gap of a minor level between them, especially when they were both on the level of the 9th lotus? Wasn't this clearly snatching the battle beast by force? Huai Jian also faltered. You are also a monarch star yourself, and still act so brazenly, so shameless. Senior brother Feng, this is Ba. I have deliberately brought him here to introduce him to Lord Desolate Eternity. Huai Jian's expression darkened. Feng Hailuan smiled faintly in response. If the battle beast was in Huai Jian's possession, he would definitely not dare to snatch it by force. This was the heavenly venerate Desolate Eternity's arrangements. Who would dare go against the will of a heavenly venerate? But Ling Han was a different story altogether. Even if he really became the disciple of the heavenly venerate Desolate Eternity, that was still a future matter. Moreover, the heavenly venerate desolate eternity's attitude towards his disciples had always been leaving them alone. If you were strong enough, you could win what belonged to you. Ling Han had also snatched this battle beast from Huai Jian's possession, so it was natural that Feng Haoan could snatch it over for himself as well. In the future, if Ling Han had the ability, he could snatch it back as well. Of course, he would definitely suppress Ling Han continuously, not allowing him the opportunity to surpass himself. Junior brother Huai Jian, you still do not know the rules of our line of desolate eternity. I don't blame you, but you should not interfere in this matter. Feng Haoan said, his tone slightly severe. He was already putting on airs as a senior brother. Right at this moment, a commotion was actually heard from behind him, and very soon the fog visibly parted, giving way to 3 people. They were Jing Zhongyue, Su Xing, and Shui Ge. They, too, held a small pendant which was emanating light, dispelling the fog. Clearly, they had also gained the notice of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity, who had given them the key to ascend the divine desolate mountain. Why didn't Ling Han have one too? When they spotted Ling Han and Huai Jian, Jing Zhongyue and the others were also extremely surprised. You guys are... Feng Haoan's eyes swept over them. These 3 people were actually holding the token of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity, which meant that he had another 3 junior brothers and junior sister, which also meant that the competition was becoming more intense. I am Shui Ge. I am Su Xing. I am Jing Zhongyue. Jing Zhongyue and the others introduced themselves, but their expressions were all proud, holding no hint of respect. This was the pride that belonged to a supreme monarch star. Feng Haoan's brow wrinkled in a frown, but he very soon set this matter aside and turned his attention back to Ling Han. If you dare not fight me, scram off the mountain. Without the token of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity in Ling Han's possession, Feng Haoan absolutely had no need to show Ling Han any cordiality. Yet, Huai Jian frowned, thinking that it was possible that he had accidentally caused a problem despite his good intentions. Since Jing Zhongyue and the others had all gotten the favor of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity, then it was impossible that Ling Han, who was even stronger, had not. That only meant one thing, and that was the heavenly venerate desolate eternity already knew that Huai Jian had brought Ling Han here, so he did not bother to manifest again just to bestow his token. But now that things had progressed to this point, it was too late for him to have any regrets. Jing Zhongyue and the others had not expected that they would encounter the scene of Ling Han facing off against the disciples of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity at their arrival, and couldn't help but feel greatly intrigued. But no matter how high their opinion of Ling Han was, they did not think that he could possibly be a match for Feng Haoan. It could not be helped. The gap in cultivation level was clearly obvious. Ling Han chuckled, yet the expression on his face became menacing. Since you are asking for a beating, I will just have to oblige you. Ha 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 ha, what shameless boasting. Feng Haoan grinned in his fury. A mere 8th Lotus 11th Leaf actually dared to declare he was going to beat him up. Where did he get his courage from? Ling Han stretched out his right hand and crooked a finger. If you want a beating, bring it on. Feng Haoan released a roar, like a primordial monster emerging. It shook millions and millions of kilometers. He moved aggressively and sent out a punch. Instantly, millions and millions of shooting stars crashed down from the skies, intending to kill Ling Han forcefully. In any case, Ling Han was not of their line, so what if he killed him? Did the disciple of a heavenly venerate need any reason to commit murder? Ling Han's eyes turned cold. Bending his legs slightly, he suddenly bounced, instantly exploding with a frightening speed. Pung, pung, pung. One after another, the shooting stars crashed down, yet they were all shattered with a single punch from him. Huai Jian, Shui Ge, and the others all looked stunned. They knew that Ling Han was very strong, but no matter how strong he was, there had to be a limit. After all, he was only an 8th Lotus 11th leaf. At maximum, his battle prowess would only be at the peak stage of the 9th Lotus first leaf. But Feng Haowan's battle prowess had definitely reached 9th Lotus second leaf. This was a massive gulf that could not be breached. Yet Ling Han did not care what they were thinking. With him brandishing his fists continuously, the shooting stars that fell were all shattered with a single punch. He had already charged towards Feng Haowan, a fist aimed straight for the latter's face. Feng Haowan was also stunned and confused. In fact, he even felt an inconceivable chill. This kind of might was inconceivable in the eyes of a monarch star like him. However, he naturally couldn't possibly just receive this punch from Ling Han. He hurriedly shouted and made his right hand's fingers bend like claws, which stabbed towards Ling Han. Boom! The two fighters' hands clashed together, instantly causing a frightening storm of energy that assaulted the skies, which turned into what seemed like furious dragons. Jing Zhongyue and the others couldn't help but widen their eyes. That was because Ling Han was really not at a disadvantage in this exchange. In fact, he was slightly enjoying the upper hand. There is no power of regulation. This is purely brute force. But how could that be? Without regulations, no matter how strong you were, it would still be useless, as it could not cause much damage. Huai Jian pondered quietly for a long while, and finally said, "No, he has still used regulations. Yet it is a kind of regulation that we cannot comprehend." Were there any regulations like that? Jing Zhongyue exchanged looks with the others. But if that was not the case, they really could not accept the fact that pure brute force could actually contend against a 9th Lotus first leaf monarch star. It should be known that even if the power of regulation was removed from an ancestral king, his battle prowess would only be at the level of the 6th Lotus. Amidst their utter shock, Ling Han had already sent out a barrage of fists of fury, pummeling Feng Haowan endlessly. What had he done? First, it was Si Huangyin, and now it was Feng Haowan. Did they all think that he was an easy target to bully? If so, he would have to burst out. Huai Jian and the others had all gone mad. Feng Haowan had actually fallen into a disadvantage, and it was an absolute disadvantage at that, with Ling Han suppressing him completely in battle. This kind of battle prowess had to be about the peak stage of the 9th Lotus second leaf, right? Huai Jian swallowed with much difficulty. He was a 9th Lotus first leaf monarch star, and was a supreme monarch star at that. Even if he had just advanced into this level, he only possessed the battle prowess of the early stage 9th Lotus second leaf. But this was also his limit. To explode with even stronger battle prowess, he could only use powerful moves. As for Ling Han, even if he was constantly using powerful moves, he should not be so powerful still. And to think that he actually said that he did not want to suppress Ling Han with a superior cultivation level, but from the look of things now, if the two of them really were to fight, would he be able to withstand 100 moves from Ling Han? Pum, pum, pum. Ling Han exploded. He drew close to Feng Haowan, and every punch he delivered was like the intense collision of endless great stars, blasting Feng Haowan to the point of throwing up blood nonstop. Crack! His fist landed on Feng Haowan's face, and forcefully crushed half of his face. Even his bones had been crushed into dust. The man's countenance completely turned into a mess of blood and flesh. What bit of the dashing and handsome good looks that a member of the angel race had was left on him? Ling Han continued the attack with a knee. Pow! A muffled sound was heard from within Feng Haowan's body. That was the sound of various internal organs inside his body being crushed. Chapter 2353, Human. Chapter 2353, Human. Feng Haowan screamed in pain as his vitality declined greatly. He had long since cultivated the mystery realms of the body, but now they were forcefully destroyed by Ling Han, which naturally caused him serious injuries. What are you howling for? Weren't you speaking very tough? Ling Han tossed him onto the ground, and a crack was heard with a forceful stomp. Feng Haoan instantly released a harsh cry. His left leg had been forcefully broken, the broken bone exposed, red and white all over. How does it feel to be bullied? Ling Han followed with another stomp. Feng Haoan's right leg was also broken, the part of his knee directly sunken. Only a bit of torn flesh was left connected to his calf. Fun, right? Ling Han smirked coldly, raising his foot high. This time he was aiming straight for the place between Feng Haoan's legs. Feng Haoan was almost crazy with panic. Being injured by an elite of Ling Han's level would leave behind extremely serious aftereffects. For example, he would need at least a few thousand years to heal his broken bones if a heavenly venerate or ancestral king did not interfere. And if his crotch was stomped on, it was a small matter that he would not be able to use his D*CK for a few thousand years. More importantly, the psychological humiliation would mean that he would be living in a nightmare for the rest of his life. On the other side, Little Terror had also pounced on Si Huangyin, harshly biting into his bottom. Si Huangyin was in so much pain that he was sprawled out on the ground. He was continuously kicking out with his legs, as if it was better for him to die than be alive at this moment. This man and beast, or master, and servant were really both too powerful. He, as expected of the champion of the elite leaderboard of the 1,000 Academy tournament, impressive. Applause rang out, and a young girl from the demon race appeared. Her features were actually quite delicate, but accompanied with the looks of the demon race, she still did not match the aesthetic values of Ling Han and the others. However, Su Xing's eyes immediately lit up. He was a genuine member of the demon race. Ling Han's foot was still planted on Feng Haoan, but his eyes turned towards this girl from the demon race, and his gaze involuntarily became tense. This was a 9th Lotus Second Leaf elite, Zi Shuang. This girl from the demon race pointed at herself. She possessed an incredibly voluptuous figure, shapely and seductive. Though she still had a tail, it was still a uniquely beautiful sight. Junior brother Ba, you're not really thinking of killing these junior brothers of mine, right? She laughed lightly, as if she had absolutely no plans to save Si Huangyin and Feng Haoan. Yet Feng Haoan and Si Huangyin were both very aware. The competition between them, the people under the heavenly venerate desolate eternity, was incredibly intense, especially when they were of the same cultivation level, because their cultivation resources were similar, which would definitely mean a harsh contest between them. This was also the deliberate arrangement of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity. This was just like raising goo, where only the strongest elite would stand out from the rest one. Ling Han smiled slightly and replied, "This man intended to kill me. Why can't I kill him? This is my junior brother. If you kill him, I can only kill you." Zi Shuang sighed, appearing to feel very regretful. This woman was very interesting. She made no mention of wanting to save Feng Haoan, but rather only spoke of revenge. She was practically saying that she did not care at all about this junior brother. But because they were both of the desolate eternities line, she had to do something and eliminate his murderer. Moreover, even if I am no match for you, there are still 7 senior brothers and 2 senior sisters here. 7 of them are 9th Lotus Third Leaf, and 2 have already ascended to become ancestral kings. Junior brother Ba, are you going to kill everyone? She looked at Ling Han with her large eyes, which were shining brightly. In the eyes of a member of the demon race like herself, Ling Han was extremely handsome. Ling Han's demeanor was grave and stern, and though his body art had surpassed his cultivation level, it could match early stage 9th Lotus Third Leaf at most. It would be delusional to hope for even the slightest bit more. To say nothing of ancestral kings, even a 9th Lotus Third Leaf monarch star was enough trouble for him to contend with. However, he was not the kind of person that was used to threats, either. With him exerting slight force with his foot, Feng Haoan was instantly waving his limbs with all his might. Ling Han had placed his foot on the latter's throat, and a frightening pressure was transmitted, making him feel like death was really just around the corner. Junior brother Ba. Zi Shuang switched her expression and smiled genially. In the future, we will all be family. A family naturally has to be harmonious, don't you think so? A smile slowly appeared on Ling Han's face as he said, Senior sister is right. He slowly withdrew his foot, while Little Terror immediately loosened its fangs with a cry. With a leap, it darted next to his feet, rubbing against his leg and looking completely like a cute pet that was begging for a rub. Zi Shuang showed a hint of wariness. Not only did Ling Han have heaven-defying strength, he could be flexible as well, and did not have the stubborn pride that an ordinary monarch star would usually have. If this kind of person became an enemy, that would be very, very troublesome. This is a wise action. She smiled dazzlingly. Under the banner of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity, there were a total of 19 disciples that were at the 9th lotus. They all had a competitive relationship with one another, but if they fought alone, it was extremely likely that others would ally together to target them. Hence, she, too, wished to seek an ally, and as someone who was also of the demon race and whose strength was incredibly powerful, Ling Han naturally was a very good candidate. Ling Han smiled as well. Thank you for the compliment, senior sister. Follow me up the mountain, all of you. Zi Shuang did not even cast a second look at Si Huangyun and Feng Hailuan. As long as they were not dead, she couldn't be bothered to care. She led the way ahead of them, her behind swaying accompanied by captivating seduction. Even if they were angel race, holy beast, or insect race, they could not deny that this woman's figure was really extremely hot. There was no need to speak of Su Xing here, as his eyes had not been lifted from her all this while. It was no wonder that he would be attracted. There were not many monarch stars that could be worthy of him, and it was naturally even more difficult to find a beauty who was also from the demon race. No one gave any regard to Feng Hailuan and Si Huangyin. After a long while, they finally managed to get back to their feet. One was covered all over with bite wounds, while the other had both his legs broken, his abdomen ripped through, and at least half his head missing. If I don't exact revenge, I will die. I will definitely tear this brat to pieces. The two of them made a declaration with gritted teeth. Exchanging a look, they both smirked. On the other side, Ling Han and his group followed Zi Shuang up the mountain, and after traveling for a very long while, the fog finally dispersed. Everyone stowed their respective tokens as well. Zi Shuang didn't use a token, for there was no such need. The line of desolate eternity had cultivated a unique cultivation technique, so they would not be affected by this fog. Otherwise, even an 18th lotus ancestral king would lose his way here, because this was something set up by a heavenly venerate. Come, have some tea first. Exalted Master's real self has been cultivating all this while, and he has left behind a sliver of thought that has been roaming outside his body. He should be returning in a few days. Zi Shuang smiled as she received them. This was a drawing room, and was not all that glorious or splendid, but it had an imposing air. In the drawing room, all the furniture was made of stone. It appeared to be shockingly old, exuding a feeling of age and history. Tea! Zi Shuang shouted lightly, and a servant came not too long after, bearing a tea tray. Ling Han and the others all looked surprised. It was not how astonishing this servant looked, or how exceedingly high his cultivation level was, but rather that this person was actually a human. A human! In the territory of the foreign realm, a human had actually appeared. This was a man that looked to be in his 30s. Docile and submissive, he looked completely like a loyal slave. Ling Han's heart involuntarily clenched. He had never expected that he would see a human here, and judging from the look of things, he seemed to have long forgotten the grudge with the foreign realm, and was filled with subservience. Chapter 2354, Savage. Chapter 2354, Savage. Why would there be trash from a super low-level dimension here? Su Xing was the first to ask. Firstly, he was indeed curious, and secondly, he was deliberately trying to strike up a conversation with Zishuang. This question voiced the confusion in everyone's hearts, and they all turned to look towards Zishuang. Oh, when Exalted Master personally arrived in the super low-level dimension of the Celestial Realm, he killed innumerable elites, and at the same time also captured some. They are the descendants of those human elites, Zishuang said calmly. It was clear that she had since lost her curiosity. Why is it necessary to keep these pieces of trash alive? Xue Gu asked as he bared his mouth, revealing a bloodthirsty expression of cruelty. That trash was only worthy of being his food. Smiling, Zishuang replied, Master wishes to study these humans. Who knows? He may be able to find some way for us to be unafraid of the restrictions placed on us by the heaven and earth of that realm. What Lord Desolate Eternity actually has such a great ability? Everyone was stunned. Aside from Ling Han and the others, they all looked excited. The foreign realm was stronger than the celestial realm, yet had not been able to conquer the celestial realm even after so many years because, firstly, the regulations of the two realms were different, so they could not fight too long, and secondly, after they entered into the celestial realm, they would be restricted by the power of heaven and earth of the celestial realm. If this second problem could be resolved, the elites of the foreign realm would be able to penetrate deeply and use their advantage in numbers and quality to eliminate a great majority of the beings of the celestial realm. In this manner, the heaven and earth of the celestial realm would also be severely wounded, and the heaven and earth of the foreign realm would be able to easily devour the celestial realm. This was a realm war. To eliminate a realm, it was necessary to eliminate all the living beings of this realm. Otherwise, even if several dozen or over 100 heavenly venerates joined forces, they could not possibly be a match for the heaven and earth itself. It was unknown if there were even stronger heavenly venerates in high-level dimensions that could truly defeat the heaven and earth. Yet Ling Han's heart throbbed widely. The foreign realm was really working tirelessly to invade the celestial realm. If the heavenly venerate Desolate Eternity really succeeded, there would definitely be no worse news for the celestial realm than this. Thankfully, now that the two-realm passageway was hindered, and the storm of energy raged like an ocean, even an 18th Lotus Ancestral King could not pass through. Even if a heavenly venerate barged through forcefully, they would be severely wounded, and once they were further targeted by the heaven and earth, they would probably be forcefully killed. Hence, there was at least several tens of billions of years that the celestial realm was still safe. Ha! That super low-level dimension thinks that just because the storm of energy is there as a barrier, we would have to wait several tens of billions of years, right? Su Xing smirked coldly. There has long since been several heavenly venerates that have been dealing with that. At most in 1 billion years, we will definitely be able to sweep aside the storm of energy and begin the war once more. Senior Sister Zishuang, how long is Lord Desolate Eternity away from success? Jing Zhongyue asked. I am not sure about that either. Zishuang shook her head. However, from the occasional words that Exalted Master has spoken, it is probably a matter of just a few dozen billion years or so. Everyone was excited. Compared with a realm war that would last for epochs, several dozen billion years was really just the blink of the eye. Ling Han's heart clenched. He had been too optimistic. He had not thought that the heavenly venerates of the foreign realm would be so proactive in the invasion. True, they, too, were being attacked by the dark inverse realm. If they did not conquer the celestial realm as soon as possible, they themselves would be done for. The heavenly venerates of the celestial realm are also working together with us, speeding up the dispersal of the energy storm, Zishuang continued. This was a piece of incredibly shocking news. Ling Han, too, could not help but raise a brow, feeling an urge to curse. It was enough that the heavenly venerates of the celestial realm offered no resistance. They actually helped the foreign realm to undermine the celestial realm's forces. What was the meaning of this? The expressions of Hunyao and the other women also shifted greatly, but Huaijian and the others did not show any change in expression. It seemed as if this kind of news was very normal for them. It looked like the betrayal of the heavenly venerates of the celestial realm was no secret in the foreign realm at all. Otherwise, everyone would certainly be exclaiming and look surprised when they heard this kind of information. Presently, the expressions of Huaijian and the others were clearly normal, and it was too normal at that. "Esteemed guests, please have tea." That human servant served aromatic tea to each of them, his demeanor respectful. Ling Han sighed internally. This person should have been brainwashed with the mentality of a slave since birth, to say nothing of merely serving tea now. Even if he was commanded to go into the battlefield and kill his celestial realm companions, he would surely execute the command without any hesitation. "Senior sister, Zi Shuang, do you have a lot of such servants here?" Shui Ge suddenly asked. "A great many." Zi Shuang nodded. "Then I will not hold myself back," Shui Ge said, suddenly turning into his original form. With a flash, he had turned into a bloody streak, darting into the head of that human. That human did not even have the chance to groan. His legs directly weakened as he collapsed loudly onto the ground. The gap between their cultivation levels and strength was really too wide. Xiao, with another flash, Shui Ge leaped out of the forehead of that human once more, returning to his human form. He licked his lips and said, "Though the celestial realm is backwards, the taste of the beings that the realm nurtures isn't too bad. Furthermore, we can gain a sliver of the regulations of the heaven and earth by devouring their souls and brain juice. If the amount is sufficient and quality is good enough, we will have a chance to cultivate the regulations of that heaven and earth." His sudden burst into murder was too fast, and even Ling Han had not managed to stop him in time. He had really not imagined that Shui Ge would actually be so deranged. In the eyes of the beings of the foreign realm, what difference was there between the beings of the celestial realm and normal food? He, I have absolutely no interest in consuming those filthy beings. We had best wait for Lord Desolate Eternity to create the secret technique and enter into the celestial realm after cultivating it, Jing Zhongyue said. By then we should become ancestral kings too. "I do not mind myself," Su Xing said, revealing a sinister expression. Shui Ge was just about to speak when Peng, a punch landed heavily on his face. It just happened to land on his mouth, and he immediately spluttered out a mouthful of blood, half of his teeth broken. He looked at Ling Han in shock, his mouth wide and his eyes filled with doubt and fury. "Why had you hit me? Why? Did I trifle with you?" Ling Han withdrew his fist and stated calmly, "I suddenly thought you looked very detestable, so I hit you. What is it? Dissatisfied?" "Fuck, of course I am." Shui Ge almost roared, yet forcefully suppressed the urge. So what if he was dissatisfied? So what if he fought with all his might? Was there any chance he could defeat Ling Han? Ling Han was indeed unreasonable, but the most important thing in this world was strength. You could only make the rules if you were strong enough. "I will remember this," he said as he gritted his remaining teeth, gritting his teeth so tightly that there were cracks heard. Ling Han was completely unconcerned, because he would not see anyone from the celestial realm after entering into the foreign realm. He had not witnessed any scenes of the residents of the foreign realm slaughtering beings of the celestial realm, so he had temporarily forgotten about the savage nature of the living creatures of the foreign realm. But in truth, this was the disdain, contempt, hatred, and thinking the beings of the celestial realm were only their toys and food that was rooted in their bloodlines. It would never change. In this moment, Ling Han really wanted to kill Shui Ge, but this kind of action would be too rash. He could not just look at the details and forget about the bigger picture. Killing one Shui Ge would not be able to solve the problem for the celestial realm. After the death of this Shui Ge, the foreign realm still had 1,000 or 10,000 Shui Ge that could even be 10 or even 100 times more savage and crueler than Shui Ge. After he became a heavenly venerate, he would turn the entire foreign realm upside down. Huaijian and the others were also very confused. This punch from Ling Han was really too inconceivable, and even Zi Shuang felt surprised. Though the internal strife in the line of the desolate eternity was very intense, this kind of irrational attack was still too bizarre. Chapter 2355, Zhikong. Chapter 2355, Zhikong. Have tea, Zi Shuang said smilingly, lightly switching the topic from how Shuai had been hit. Firstly, that was the common practice of the line of desolate eternity. If it was a grudge between two people of equal cultivation level, it would be settled on their own, and elites were forbidden from interfering. Secondly, she was more biased towards Ling Han as well. This was a man that she looked very highly upon. Thus, Shuai could only wear a dark expression and vent his anger on the tea. Gulping the tea down, his tea was soon finished, and he then demanded, "Where are the servants? Where is my tea?" Zi Shuang clapped her hands, and a human immediately walked over, asking respectfully, "Miss Zi Shuang, what is your command?" Though the body of his companion was just lying in front of him, he acted as if he had seen nothing. Ling Han sighed internally. These people had long since become numb. "Serve some tea," Zi Shuang said, "and while you're at it, dispose of the corpse." "Yes, Miss Zi Shuang." That human nodded respectfully and took away the body first. After a while, he returned bearing tea. Shuai stretched out a hand and was just about to drink from the teacup he had lifted when his face suffered another punch. Instantly, all the contents of his teacup was poured onto his face, and he jumped to his feet in fury. He shouted at Ling Han, "What exactly do you mean by this? I just don't like how you look. Is this reason sufficient?" Ling Han looked back at him, his eyes menacing. Shuai very much wanted to fly into battle, but when he recalled Ling Han's frightening battle prowess, he couldn't help but suppress his fury and began to drink his tea grumpily. Zi Shuang looked at Ling Han in shock. In her eyes, Ling Han was a very flexible person and should be very subtle, only doing things after much consideration. Why was he suddenly targeting Shuai for no reason? She couldn't help but hesitate internally and decided that she would not form an alliance with Ling Han for now. What if this guy was a great troublemaker? She would then be drawing fire to herself, which would be truly unwise. Thinking of this, she was no longer in the mood to entertain them, and thus had the servants bring them to rest at the guest courtyard to wait for the summons of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity. Ling Han roamed casually on the mountain. As long as he did not descend the mountain or fly too far away from the mountain, there would be no fog surrounding him. In this place, he discovered a great many human slaves. The weakest was not even in the shattering void tier, and the strongest had reached 9th lotus. They were all cultivating the celestial technique of the foreign realm. They could not sense the power of heaven and earth of the celestial realm here, so it was natural that they were unable to cultivate regulations and could only switch to the cultivation system of the foreign realm. Ling Han summoned a random person and decided to make some queries. "Go Chi greets, young master." This human was a middle-aged man in his 30s, a 5th lotus blooming on his forehead. He was of medium build and quickly sprinted over to Ling Han, appearing very ingratiating. "Go Chi 1. Ling Han's eyes flickered again. Even the names given to them were so low-grade and base, which showed how pitiful the status of humans was here. "Don't you have any other names?" Ling Han asked. Go Chi looked blank. What other name? Was there any need to have 2 names? Though he was slightly confused, he still shook his head. "No. For people like you, how many in total are there here?" Ling Han asked. "Over 10,000 or so," Go Chi answered. Then he immediately said very proudly, "I have passed through many levels of assessment and finally became an A-grade slave. Hence, please believe me, young master, My service will definitely satisfy you. An involuntary grief rose up in Ling Han's heart. The man actually gained a feeling of superiority from being a slave. It was clear that this was brainwashing that had carried on for generations. Do you know where your ancestors originate from? Ling Han asked. I do. It is a place filled with sin, and every person there deserves to die. Lord, desolate eternity has very kindly taken our ancestors here, so we must be slaves for many generations to redeem ourselves, Go Chi said with much fear. Ling Han shook his head and was in no mood to ask further. He waved his hand, dismissing the other party. Go Chi was slightly fearful and also felt slightly blank. Ling Han had summoned him over just to ask so many strange questions. Was it because the former felt some displeasure about him? The pillar of support for his life was to be of service to the beings of the foreign realm. If this sacred mission was taken from him, his life would lose all meaning. Ling Han walked some way further and saw a stone statue ahead of him. This was an insect race member that had the form of a mantis, who knew how long it had been here as it was covered with dust. He couldn't help but cast a second look at it, a strange feeling rising up in his heart. Vaguely, he could feel that there was something off, but no matter what, he could not figure out what was off about it. This is a living creature with vitality index as high as 10,000 points. Wally's voice suddenly rang out in Ling Han's mind. Ordinary communication through divine sense could possibly be intercepted by elites, but Wally's communication definitely could not. According to him, he had used some kind of power that surpassed regulations to further code it, and it was impossible that anyone could intercept the message. Finally, Ling Han realized what was odd. As it turned out, this insect ray statue was actually a living being and was a supreme existence that had the battle prowess of a 15th Lotus ancestral king at that. He stopped walking and bowed to pay his respects to the stone statue, saying, "Greetings, Senior." This status trembled, its eyes slowly opening. Instantly, a frightening aura surged out, pressure descending like a mountain, as if even divine metal could not bear up against this pressure. "Youth, your insight is not too bad." A voice rang out from the statue, filled with a metallic trait. H.I.'s figure trembled slightly, and dust fell off continuously, revealing his true self. He was completely golden, and actually did not have the disgusting vibe given off by the insect race. Merely 8th Lotus 11th leaf, and you can actually see through to my real self. TSK. He appeared very curious. Just how exactly have you managed to do so? Naturally, it is because Senior is too captivating in bearing, which cannot be concealed at all. Ling Han babbled complete nonsense. Naturally, he could not possibly reveal Wally's existence. This insect race laughed loudly and did not proceed to interrogate Ling Han further. Everyone had their own secrets, and he naturally would not disdain to compel a minor character of merely 8th Lotus. "I am Ji Kong, Master's 8th disciple. Unfortunately, I have followed Master for several epochs, yet has still not managed to become an 18th Lotus." He shook his head, seeming very disappointed. "This is the place of seclusion for Master. I am cultivating here, borrowing a sliver of Master's heavenly venerable tier aura, and perhaps may be able to break through to 16th Lotus." Ling Han was surprised. Could it be that not all of heavenly venerate desolate eternity's disciples were monarch stars? As long as they were monarch stars and did not make any wrong turns on their path of cultivation, they would definitely be able to become 18th Lotus ancestral kings in the future. Ji Kong laughed loudly. Though there is no shortage of monarch stars among Master's disciples, not all of them are monarch stars. Many years ago, Master has attempted to boost people whose aptitude is the most ordinary to the height of the 18th Lotus ancestral king, and I had the fortune to be taken as Master's disciple. Initially, even becoming a 9th Lotus would have been difficult for me, but through Master's teachings, I have now actually become a 15th Lotus ancestral king. Unfortunately, I have still disappointed exalted master. Ling Han was internally stunned. The heavenly venerate, desolate eternity truly had astonishing ways and frightening foals. First, he wanted to make it so that every single person of the foreign realm would no longer have to fear being weakened by the heaven and earth of the celestial realm. And now, he wanted to turn a person with ordinary aptitude into an 18th Lotus ancestral king. If he were to succeed, the overall strength of the foreign realm would reach a frightening level. Thankfully, Ji Kong was still a 15th Lotus after cultivating for who knew how many years, and this was the result even with the dedicated guidance of a heavenly venerate. It looked like it was not very possible that this goal would be achieved. Chapter 2356, 16,000 points. Chapter 2356, 16,000 points. I heard that Master is going to take quite a few new disciples this time round, Ji Kong said. He looked at Ling Han and broke into a smile. There is a strange pattern, or it may be a coincidence. Every 9th disciple that Master takes would be extraordinarily strong. My 9th junior brother was the first to advance to the 18th Lotus ancestral king out of all the disciples. My 19th junior brother, despite joining later, has surpassed him. Not only has he become an 18th Lotus ancestral king, his battle prowess is also world-shaking, one of the very best among ancestral kings. Though my 29th junior brother has only just advanced into the ranks of ancestral kings, so far, the prodigies that joined in the same period as he has are but at the 9th Lotus. And now, there is definitely one among you that can become the 39th disciple. I am slightly curious myself. There was a coincidence like that. Ling Han was internally unconcerned. Though there was indeed the saying of fortune in the world, he was not a person that belonged to this heaven and earth. So how could fortune possibly boost him? Making no mistakes was already a success. However, since Ji Kong had said thus, Ling Han also responded with a smile and said, I will keep senior brother Ji Kong's words in mind and try to get the 39th place. Ji Kong nodded, and then continued, Master is in seclusion here and forbids anyone from approaching. However, it is not because that would cause him any disturbance, but rather because his strength is really too great. A slight thought would be capable of destroying the heavens and eliminating the earth. The safety zone that Master has created ends after this line. Hence, I stand guard here, firstly to borrow Master's fortune, and secondly to prevent new junior sisters and junior brothers from accidentally barging into this area in a moment of carelessness. Ling Han nodded and clasped his hands, saying, Thank you for the advice, senior brother. Yet, he was internally curious. Since a heavenly venerable tier had omnipotent power, what need was there to create a safety zone, even if he was in seclusion? So what? If he desired this place to be safe, this place would become impenetrable. If he wanted this place to be dangerous, then this would be a danger zone that even an 18th Lotus ancestral king would get a headache about. Something was wrong. Ling Han had a powerful feeling of crisis. He had to stop the heavenly venerate desolate eternity from coming up with a method to adapt to the power of heaven and earth of the celestial realm. And the real self of this heavenly venerate was constantly in seclusion, studying this kind of method precisely. Ling Han had to cause some damage. There were two options. One was to take all the humans into the Black Tower without any materials. How was the other party to continue his studies? Or the second one, which was to launch a sneak attack on this old geezer. The greatest taboo during seclusion was to be disturbed by others. But would merely 9th Lotus Tier's strength be capable of disturbing a heavenly venerate? No matter how he thought about it, it was delusional. He had best take the first option. Ling Han bid Ji Kong farewell and did not roam any further. Instead, he returned to his own place, waiting patiently. A few days later, a sliver of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity's divine sense descended. A feeling of unease and anxiety instantly rose up in everyone's heart. It was as if even their soul was trembling. Ling Han understood internally. This was because Heavenly Venerable Tier was an existence that surpassed regulations. Yet what everyone was cultivating was precisely regulations. Thus, when they encountered a Heavenly Venerate, they would be just like mice that had come upon a cat. Both sides were not even on the same level at all. Ling Han was unafraid because he too had once been an overlord of a realm, though it was not all that authentic, but at least he had still been a pseudo-Heavenly Venerable Tier, and was no weaker in level. In fact, from a certain aspect, he had been the strongest of a small realm, while Heavenly Venerates were only several of the stronger existences in a large realm. In that aspect he was more impressive. A thought suddenly rose up in his mind. Why was it that a Heavenly Venerate could not produce another Heavenly Venerate from their teachings? That was right. Being at the side of this Heavenly Venerable Tier, learning and studying the aura of the Heavenly Venerate would indeed help one to become a Heavenly Venerate. But if it took too long, the majesty of this Heavenly Venerate would be subconsciously carved into their bones, and they would continue living in the former's shadow. Since that was the case, how were they then supposed to become Heavenly Venerates? Hence, one could be close with a Heavenly Venerate, but the time period definitely could not be too long. Greetings, Master. Greetings, Lord Desolate Eternity. Everyone bowed down. Though Ling Han was internally displeased, he still had to pretend for now, and thus bowed down with the three women following suit. The divine sense of the Heavenly Venerate Desolate Eternity took the form of a demon race member, because only holy beasts and insect race needed to take human form. The image that this sliver of divine sense took should be the original appearance of the Heavenly Venerate Desolate Eternity. He was a very short build. In fact, his body was slightly stooped, with a single horn as black as ink growing from his head. Meanwhile, his skin was no different from any other demon race members, being as bright red as blood. Merely appearance-wise, he really did not have the slightest outstanding trait. Celestial kings would be entwined by various colored clouds, but he was very ordinary, so average that others would forget him quickly after the first look. But when his eyes swept over, Ling Han felt that his thought processes actually stopped, as if time itself was frozen. When he regained his wits, it was unknown how much time had already passed. Perhaps it had only been an instant, or it might have been millions and millions of years. In fact, Ling Han felt that even Small Tower had awoken, exuding a strong feeling of wariness. The precious tool of a Heavenly Venerate was actually afraid. I made some miscalculations. The vitality index of the original self of this living creature should be close to 16,000 points. The heaven-deceiving technique that I modified cannot deceive his original self. But thankfully this is just the wave created by a sliver of his divine sense. Wally's voice rang out. Fuck! Ling Han almost wanted to strangle this guy. The latter's slight mistake would cause him to lose his life. The activation of the Black Tower would need time, and he would also need time to complete a thought, and this bit of time was enough for a Heavenly Venerate to kill him hundreds of millions of times over. Who would have thought? Wally would actually have a moment when he could not be depended on. Hold on, the vitality index of a Heavenly Venerate was 15,000 points. So what the heck did close to 16,000 mean? Ling Han asked Wally through encrypted divine sense about this. 15,000 is Heavenly Venerable Tier, so what is 16,000? Great Heavenly Venerate? Naturally Heavenly Venerate as well. Just an even stronger Heavenly Venerate, Wally replied unhurriedly. Additionally, you are a pure living being, so the concealment of your spiritual fluctuation cannot compare to mine. Thus, it is best you do not speak to me, or you will increase the chances of being discovered, which will be as high as 57%. As expected, when his words fell, the eyes of the Heavenly Venerate Desolate Eternity turned over to him and roamed over Ling Han's face, seeming to be quite intrigued before then sliding past. You all, the heavenly venerate, desolate eternities, eyes paused on the faces of Ling Han, Huai Jian, Shui Go, Jing Zhongyue, and Su Xing, respectively, represent the most outstanding younger generation in the latest epoch of our realm. Today, I shall take you as disciples and hope that you can advance further, reaching a height similar to mine. Thank you for your training, Master, the 5 of them answered simultaneously. The Empress, Hunyao, and bewitching Maidenro were not qualified to become the disciples of the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity. They were only here as Ling Han's family. The desolate eternity, heavenly venerate, nodded. I do not like unnecessarily elaborate mannerisms. You all may just kowtow, and you will all be my disciples in the future. Disciples pay respects to Lord Master. Ling Han and the others all knelt down and bowed. Only Ling Han was muttering internally when he did so. Old geezer, I will bow down to you today, but you will have to return the favor in the future. The heavenly venerate, desolate eternity smiled and looked again at their 5 faces before saying, Huai Jian is the first that I have set my eyes on, so he is naturally your senior brother and becomes my 37th disciple. Yes. Huai Jian nodded respectfully. Shui Go, you are the 38th disciple. Yes. Jing Zhongyue, you are the 39th disciple. Understood. Su Xing, you are the 40th disciple. Yes. Bah! Heavenly venerate, desolate eternity, looked towards Ling Han. You originally should have been 38th, but you have come together with Huai Jian. I did not deliberately manifest myself, so you will be counted as the youngest. Chapter 2357 Heavenly venerate, desolate eternities Tao. Chapter 2357 Heavenly venerate, desolate eternities Tao. Understood. Ling Han nodded respectfully as well. He only wanted to feel the aura of a heavenly venerate, and was not concerned about whether he could be the 38th disciple or what his rank was among the other disciples. This is the knowledge that has come from my recent studies. I bestow it on you all. The heavenly venerate, desolate eternity flicked his fingers, and Xiao, 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 5 streaks of light darted from his hands, sinking respectively into the foreheads of Ling Han and the others. The 5 of them hurriedly bowed in gratitude once more, but the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity only waved a hand, and the sliver of divine sense instantly disappeared. Ling Han checked himself and discovered a sphere of light had appeared in his mind. With a light touch, millions of regulations instantly flowed out, as if the heaven and earth itself had manifested and taken form. If he used this to cultivate, it would mean half the work with twice the results. Unfortunately, this was not effective for Ling Han, because he had the origin magic cube, which was even more helpful for his cultivation. However, this was still a treasure. Why? Because this contained the power of heaven and earth that the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity had cultivated. The reason why a heavenly venerable tier was so strong was because he had leaped out of the range of regulations and touched the essence of heaven and earth, becoming capable of directly using the power of heaven and earth. And just now, when the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity bestowed it on the 5 of them, it was inevitable that he would also be gifting a bit of his own power to them. Though it was pitifully little, in essence, there was no difference. The others would be completely unable to detect this kind of power. Even an 18th Lotus ancestral king could only detect it with great difficulty. Only a pseudo-heavenly venerate who had touched the power of heaven and earth before, and was close to comprehending the essence of the heaven and earth, was capable of understanding it. Coincidentally, Ling Han was one such existence. He had once been a pseudo-heavenly venerate, and even if his present strength and cultivation level had fallen from that level, his sensitivity for the power of heaven and earth was still there. Otherwise, he could not possibly have been able to extract void particle energy. This is the heavenly venerate, desolate eternities Tao. Ling Han thought, Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Now that he had understood the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity's Tao in advance, should the two of them clash in the future, he would be able to grab the key moment firsthand, the precondition that he himself had become a heavenly venerate as well. Ling Han showed a hint of surprise and was even stunned to the extreme. In the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity's power, he discovered several slivers of aura that belonged to the celestial realm. How is this possible? The heavenly venerate, desolate eternity was an elite of the foreign realm. So how could he possibly extract the essence power of the celestial realm? If it was said that the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity was actually an elite that originated from the celestial realm, there was clearly the aura of the heaven and earth of the foreign realm within his power, and was clearly dominant in his power at that. Hiss, the old geezer, was presently studying how to remove the restrictions of the heaven and earth of the celestial realm. Was he already close to succeeding? No, not being repressed by the heaven and earth was one thing, but possessing the power of another realm was another. Even the dark inverse realm had only sent Wally and another super elite into this realm to steal the power of heaven and earth of the foreign realm after absorbing all the knowledge of the high-level dimension. Ling Han was extremely curious. Could it be that the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity had gone to cultivate in the celestial realm, and had thus managed to comprehend the essence power of the celestial realm? But the overall level of the celestial realm was lower, and a heavenly venerate would be immediately targeted the moment they appeared. Those, like the heavenly venerates of the foreign realm, would be further repressed. This was no joking matter. Otherwise, Ling Han did not believe that the karmic life heavenly venerable was so strong that he was capable of facing off against everyone on his own when the 9 great heavenly venerates attacked the celestial realm together. It had to be that the heaven and earth of the celestial realm had repressed them, and that was why the karmic life heavenly venerable had managed to perform a miracle. But precisely because of this, it was really too inconceivable that the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity had managed to cultivate the power of heaven and earth of the celestial realm. Hold on, I have overlooked an important clue. Ling Han recalled the human slaves on divine, desolate mountain. They were beings that had originated from the celestial realm. Could they be related to the fact that the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity had successfully comprehended this kind of power? These beings were too insignificant. Logically, there was no way that they could help a heavenly venerate comprehend the power of heaven and earth of another realm. But judging from the present situation, what deduction would be more logical than this? I will discuss it further with Wally later. Junior brothers and junior sister, congratulations! The moment the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity left, Zishuang and the others approached, offering congratulations to Ling Han and the others. The heavenly venerate, desolate eternity had taken 36 disciples previously, and 11 of them had already completed their training and become independent. Some were at the 2-realm battlefield, resisting the invasion of the dark inverse realm. Some are part of the invading troops against the celestial realm, and some are roaming the world, longing to take the final step and advance into the heavenly venerable tier. There were only 25 disciples presently here, and there were as many as 19 among them that were still at the 9th lotus. They were all disciples that the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity had taken in the last few billion years. Previously, the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity had been very careful in taking disciples. He had not demanded that they all had high natural talent, but they all had their unique traits, unlike now, when he would only take disciples that had astonishingly high natural talent. These disciples all had their own secret schemes, especially those who were similarly at the 9th lotus. Everyone would soon become direct competitors, though they were very cordial in their words. A storm was already brewing in secret. Those like Feng Haowan and Si Huangyin were glaring coldly and angrily at Ling Han, making no effort to conceal their animosity. Ling Han was in no mood to bother about them. After speaking a few casual words with them, He brought the 3 women back to his quarters, and then immediately related the doubts that he had. The 3 women were naturally extremely stunned by this, and offered their own deductions on the identity of the heavenly venerate, desolate eternity. Could it be that he was a heavenly venerate that had betrayed the celestial realm? Ling Han asked Wally, and the latter directly replied that he did not have enough information, and was thus unable to make his deductions. Ling Han thought for a long time, and decided to first set this matter aside. Instead, he had to save the slaves here. Whether these people needed Ling Han to save them was not important, because they had already been completely brainwashed. Helping to free them from the fate of being slaves would instead gain their hatred. But if their existence would help the heavenly venerate desolate eternity to comprehend the power of heaven and earth of the celestial realm, then Ling Han was determined to take them away with him no matter what. He waited for a few days and secretly grasped the situation on divine desolate mountain. He knew where these human slaves resided, and then all he had to do was wait until that sliver of divine sense of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity left. If he did something in the presence of the divine sense of this heavenly venerate, he would definitely be caught red-handed. If you tried hard, you were bound to succeed eventually. 3 years later, the heavenly venerate desolate eternity received a message from another heavenly venerate and left to attend a conference of heavenly venerates. Ling Han finally found his chance. In a single stroke, he had taken 1/3 of the human slaves, and when he was just about to take a few more in, he alerted an ancestral king, so he could only hide himself in the Black Tower and retreat. On the 2nd day, a great commotion instantly arose on divine desolate mountain. Someone had actually barged into the place of enlightenment of a heavenly venerate and kidnapped people. The main body of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity naturally could not be disturbed, and his sliver of divine sense had already left. Thus, this matter could only be delegated to the 2 ancestral kings. Originally, everything that happened here would be handled by ancestral King Nawa. He had just broken through to 10th Lotus 700 million years ago, and was now already a 12th Lotus existence, his advancement being astonishingly rapid. Because he was a monarch tier, he would be able to reach the height of 13th Lotus or 14th Lotus with his own power, even without the guidance of a heavenly venerate. But because this matter was about the pride of the line of the desolate eternity, he invited Ji Kong to join him, and the 2 great ancestral kings investigated this matter together. This naturally produced 0 results. The protective barrier around the mountain had not been damaged in the slightest, and they could not understand how this great thief had managed to barge in no matter how hard they thought. More importantly, why had this great thief kidnapped so many of their human slaves? Chapter 2358, Volcano. Chapter 2358, Volcano. Presently, surveillance was tight, so Ling Han naturally would not make any further movements, but rather chose to wait patiently. Not long afterwards, a rumor spread farther and farther on the mountain. This thieving criminal came from the line of the desolate eternity, and Ling Han and the other new disciples were being directly targeted as suspects. Why had nothing happened before, and something had come up the moment they came? Huai Jian and the others all did not bother to refute. What a joke! What would they be doing with these lowly slaves? Even Shui scoffed. He only thought of these slaves as snacks for him. He would not droop so low to steal them away. This kind of rumor naturally had no basis, but why had it spread? Ling Han knew that it had to be those senior brothers and senior sisters that had come up with it, and their motive was to smear the names of Ling Han and the others. The line of the desolate eternity had always been competitive. With so many apprentice brothers and sisters, how were they supposed to contend for favor without using some tricks? Ling Han couldn't help but laugh secretly. These people's blind guess had actually hit the spot, but these people would definitely be unable to guess the real purpose that he had kidnapped these humans for. Because 2 ancestral kings were taking turns to stand guard, Ling Han did not find any chance to do anything, so he could only continue waiting. And as he waited, another 5 years passed. A guest suddenly arrived on Divine, Desolate Mountain. He was an insect race member, but he had taken human form. His arms still maintained the form of the insect race, being covered with black scales, and he did not have hands, but rather 2 gigantic pincers that looked like weapons forged from divine metal. So it is junior brother Liao Kong, Underlord Underworld. They came out to meet him, and while they were at it, introduced him to those who didn't know who he was. Underworld was the title of a heavenly venerate. Liao Kong greeted them with a nod. My exalted master has invited Lord Desolate Eternity over to discuss some matters, and just happened to discover a volcanic eruption from which the source power of heaven and earth is flowing. It is greatly helpful for those 9th Lotus senior brothers and senior sisters, as well as those junior brothers and junior sisters who are close to breaking through to the 9th Lotus. He has thus commanded that I pay you a visit and bring all of you there. Though the cultivation systems of the foreign realm and the celestial realm differed, certain aspects were similar. For example, progressing from the immortal palace tier to ascending origin tier in the celestial realm, or from the 8th lotus to 9th lotus in the foreign realm, was a qualitative change. In the celestial realm, origin power was converted into source power, whose quality was far higher than origin powers. Why was it said that even if celestial kings did not have the power of regulation, their battle prowess was still capable of matching severing mundane tier? That was because the overall level of source power was higher. Otherwise, no matter how great their power, it would still be like a strong man striking others with a paper stick, completely dealing no damage. In the foreign realm, this step similarly spelt a qualitative change in spiritual power. The breach from the immortal palace tier to ascending origin tier could be executed slowly, converting origin power bit by bit into source power. To speak in layman's terms, that was to compress. 10,100 million bits of origin power could condense into 1 bit of source power. If the ratio differed, the quality and amount of source power would also be different. Naturally, the harder it was being compressed, the better. But this kind of conversion rate was extremely slow. If one could lend assistance from the power of heaven and earth, the conversion rate would be greatly boosted. Thus, one could break through to the ascending origin tier behind closed doors by themselves, or could also venture into a natural mystery realm. Furthermore, the process of condensing source power would still be very slow even after crossing over into the ascending origin tier, and it would be much faster with the help of a natural mystery realm. But this kind of natural mystery realm did not appear randomly, but rather required a surge of source power from the heaven and earth, and only then could it be used by cultivators. This kind of source power was actually the concentrate of regulations. For example, the 9 heavens flame, to be frank, was a manifestation of regulations of the heaven and earth, and did not have much connection to the power of heaven and earth itself. Hearing Liao Kong's words, all those who were at the 8th lotus and 9th lotus were all extremely overjoyed. The 8th lotuses here had all reached the peak stage and were about to step into the 9th lotus. They were just in need of the source power of heaven and earth to temper themselves. Then, let's set out immediately, Zishuang and the others all said, seeming to be in a great rush. That was because the surging of source power from the heaven and earth had a time limit. It was unknown how many more years they would have to wait once they missed it. Moreover, the volcanic eruption this time around having such great amounts of source power surging out did not mean that it would once again erupt many years later. This would all depend on luck. All right. Liao Kong nodded. Actually, he, too, wanted to go there as soon as possible. Everyone immediately set out. Liao Kong had come as commanded by a heavenly venerate, so he naturally had made some preparations. With a wave of his hand, a great river of the underworld appeared out of thin air, with only a single tiny raft floating in the river. Please board the ship, Liao Kong said, and was the first to leap onto the raft. Everyone leaped over one after another. Liao Kong steered the ship, and the small raft instantly rode the winds and broke waves, being astonishingly fast. Moreover, the river was also continuously extending forwards. Merely a day later, the great river had reached its end, and the small raft stopped. They had already arrived at the foot of a great mountain, and the great mountain was presently gushing with lava. Black flames burned the skies, and it was as if the skies were about to melt. "This is Golden Cloud's mountain," Zi Shuang exclaimed in shock. "Even if we came via transference portal, we would need as long as 3 years' time." Yet now, in just a single day, they had arrived at their destination. Everyone all looked enviously at Liao Kong's hands. He had already stowed away that great river and tiny raft. "This is the treasure that Master has lent to me, and I will be returning it to Exalted Master later," Liao Kong said smilingly. As expected, only a heavenly venerate would have such heaven-defying ways. This was really too shocking. Everyone, the 2 lords, heavenly venerates, treat all the citizens of our realm equally. Thus, they did not consider this natural mystery realm as their private property. Hence, when we ascend the mountain, we will still encounter other cultivators. Liao Kong said seriously, "To obtain the source power of heaven and earth, it is inevitable that there will be competition. The 2 lords, heavenly venerates, have expressed that they would definitely not interfere, and we would have to depend on ourselves for everything." Huaijian and the others all showed hints of pride in their expressions. Which of them was not a prodigy? Especially those disciples that had joined later, they were all monarch stars at the very least. So how could they possibly fear competition? Even if they encountered a 9th Lotus Third Leaf Elite and were no match for the other party, they could still flee calmly. It would not progress to the point where they would lose their lives. Let's set out then. Everyone was filled with anticipation. Though they had come to this kind of mystery realm, it was not definite whether they would be able to attain the mystical power of heaven and earth or not. All that would have to depend on their individual luck. Practically everyone acted alone. Resources were limited, so it was natural that they would all be going it alone. Meanwhile, Ling Han advanced up the mountain together with Hunyao and the other women. Little Terror was still roughly the size of a puppy, and with bewitching Maiden Ro holding it in her arms, it looked completely like an adorable pet. The little guy was forced into submission under Ling Han's authority. This was a mountainous area that extended endlessly into the distance. That volcano that was presently bursting with lava was the main peak. It was rumored that there was supreme pressure there, and only an ancestral king would be able to reach the peak. Hence, there was no need to even think about climbing to the summit. The source power of heaven and earth was surging out together with the lava. If one could reach the summit and occupy the crater of the volcano, it would be much too easy to obtain the source power of heaven and earth. Heavenly venerates naturally could do so, but did not choose to, naturally because they could not be bothered. If the disciples of a heavenly venerate did not even have this kind of competitive awareness, they had best scram earlier. The eruptions of the volcano had no pattern to them. At times, the lava would spurt towards the east. At other times, it would be directed north. Sometimes it would gush very near, and at others it would be spraying very far. Hence, it was needless to think of standing guard somewhere and wait. Xiao, as the volcano erupted, a massive molten rock streaked through the skies, and then fell towards Ling Han and the others. Pum! This was a gigantic rock and was still burning with fiery flames, but one could still see that this was a black rock filled with primal chaos. Fuck, a chaos source rock. Chapter 2359, Area of Madness. Chapter 2359, Area of Madness. Ling Han was stunned. The so-called source power of heaven and earth was actually chaos source rock. No wonder Small Tower had previously said that the Chaos Source Rock could help it recover slightly. This was a treasure close to Celestial King tier. No, Celestial Kings were also using Source Power, which was only a level higher than regulations. This was a celestial king tier resource, and it could be said that celestial kings were using chaos source rocks one. However, though this chaos source rock in front of him was massive, the essence contained within was actually not much. To speak more crudely, it contained too many impurities. Even a little bit is still good. Ling Han swept out with a palm strike, wanting to extinguish the flames on the rock, yet shockingly discovered that the flames merely flickered when his palm landed. He actually had not managed to extinguish the flames. "Interesting," he commented, smiling. "Let Nyo do it." Hunyo was full of zest and also waved out her small hand to extinguish the fire, but the flames merely waved and were completely unmoved. Who? The little girl then simply chose to puff up her cheeks and blow out, which caused Ling Han, the Empress, and bewitching Maiden Ro to break into laughter. Even little Terror was baring its teeth, releasing a wolf-like howl. "You are no wolf, so why are you howling like one?" Hunyo placed her hands on her hips, fuming. Little Terror expressed that it was very innocent. From birth, that was the way it called out. Ling Han channeled the power of regulation and pressed his hand down once more on the burning rock. An endless chill spread out, turning into layers of ice which wrapped around the rock. The flames were immediately controlled, but they were still flickering stubbornly, seeming like they were unwilling to go out no matter what. Ling Han increased the intensity of the power of regulation, and the flames were further repressed, but still were not extinguished. The source power of heaven and earth is indeed extraordinary. Ling Han nodded internally. No wonder this would be effective for the recovery of the Black Tower. It was indeed extraordinary. However, Small Tower has also said before that a Chaos Source Rock could only help it recover by a 10,000th, which was still endlessly far from the Heavenly Venerable tier. The source power of heaven and earth should be set between regulations and the essence of a Genesis world, the transition between the Celestial King tier and Heavenly Venerable tier. Ling Han continuously used his power to suppress it. Various regulations appeared one after another, and only then did he finally suppress the flames. He casually tossed the Chaos Source Rock over to Bewitching Maiden Ro and said, "For you." "Me?" Bewitching Maiden Ro asked in surprise as she pointed at herself, appearing like she could not fathom this at all. At present, everyone needed Chaos Source Rocks, and, logically speaking, the priority of Ling Han, Hunyo, and the Empress should be higher than her. Ling Han smiled. "You have to quickly complete the tempering of the Immortal Palace tier, and we still have some slight room for improvement, so you can use it first." Both the Empress and Hunyo nodded. They were not petty people. What more when Ling Han's words were reasonable? Bewitching Maiden Ro was touched. Though Ling Han had spoken the truth, Chaos Source Rocks would not expire even if they were not used. So how could it be that it could not be stored inside the Black Tower? She did not say anything further, and merely put away the Chaos Source Rock. Ling Han nodded and said, "Your strength is indeed a weakness among us. You will only be a burden unless you advance into the ascending origin tier." When these words fell, Bewitching Maiden Ro was instantly outraged. Does this guy really not know how to speak sweet words in the slightest? "Will you die if you comfort me a bit?" "I am going into the Black Tower to cultivate," she snapped. If she had enough strength, she would definitely beat Ling Han up. Ling Han laughed and drew Bewitching Maiden Ro into the Black Tower. They continued onwards. The volcano was constantly erupting, and because the direction of lava flow was indefinite, there was no way to trace its whereabouts. Hence, they could only collect the Chaos Source Rocks that had been scattered in the area. This time, their luck was not that good, as they had not found any even after half a day. Initially, the mountain was green and grassy, but with the volcano wreaking havoc, there were holes and depressions everywhere. Some places were even filled with fiery flames, but ordinary fire could not last for too long, either. The plants here all had astonishing vitality, and the flames soon went out by themselves. Do not underestimate this place. Ling Han flipped through the information that Liao Kong had given them before. It contained a detailed introduction of Golden Clouds Mountain. The outer circle here was very safe, but when one entered into the inner circle, it would become dangerous. That was because Golden Clouds Mountain by itself was already very amazing and had a strange effect on living beings. If one stayed for a long time here, his cultivation level would advance astonishingly quickly, but the side effect would be that his spiritual state would become extremely violent, and only the primitive instincts of slaughter would be left in the end. The native wild beasts here were all violent killing machines, and some cultivators who risked coming here tried to quickly grow, yet they were all swallowed by their own greed, and ultimately also became wild beasts in human form. Though the eruptions of the volcano had no pattern, the majority of substances erupted would be falling inside the inner circle. Hence, if they wanted to increase their harvest, they would have to enter deeply into Golden Clouds Mountain's premises. "Let's climb the mountain," the Empress said. Hunyou's expression was filled with excitement. "Climb the mountain to hunt us some food." Ling Han nodded. Though this mountain was very bizarre, being capable of influencing the spiritual state, they were merely planning to stay here for around 1 or 2 months. This could not possibly turn them into wild beasts. They climbed the mountain, and there were increasingly less people around them. This was because everyone knew that there were mad wild beasts which would battle to death even if they were outmatched on the mountain, and if they encountered powerful beasts, it was definite that death would be the only outcome. Begging to be spared was useless. These wild beasts, or even wild men, only had the sole thought of slaughter, and even the disciples and descendants of heavenly venerates were worthless in their eyes. It was not just them. Even the wild beasts and wild men of the mountain were very interested in these chaos source rocks. As long as they were at the 9th lotus or had reached the peak stage of the 8th lotus, chaos source rocks would be beneficial for them, and desire for strength was their second instinct aside from desire to slaughter. Ling Han and the others soon encountered one such mad wild beast. It was a palm civet, but it was as long as 9 meters, with wings sprouting from its back. However, it was no longer snow white or golden like holy beasts, but rather dark gray in color. Furthermore, it was battered and tattered, looking incredibly ugly. The moment this wild beast appeared, it pounced, releasing a mad barrage of bites, but in truth it only had merely 8th Lotus 4th Leaf's battle prowess, and Ling Han defeated it just by stretching out a hand. Hunyou immediately took out the barbecue grill while banging a knife as she cheered, "Meat! Meat! Meat!" Ling Han waved a hand. He was very interested in the reason why these wild beasts had gone mad. Theoretically, the regulation of darkness also had this effect, being capable of driving others into madness, but Ling Han had not sensed any strong regulation of darkness in this place. If it was said that this was the main reason for their madness, he would refuse to believe it. He examined closely and discovered that there was a grayish layer contained in the head of this wild beast, but he was completely unable to discern what exactly this was. Xiao! A streak of green light suddenly shot over. As it turned out, Wally had taken human form and was presently scanning it with his eyes. A substance that has never been seen before, Wally soon declared. "Aren't you afraid that you would be discovered by a heavenly venerate by suddenly appearing like this?" Ling Han asked. "They won't." Wally appeared very confident in himself. "Firstly, I have activated my concealment skill. And secondly, those 2 beings with vitality index over 15,000 points are only a form of spiritual wave. The chance of me being discovered is 0. Ling Han knew that this guy spoke in probability and odds. Since he had appeared, it was definitely fine. Ling Han had only been joking. "Even you don't know what this is?" Ling Han asked. Chapter 2360, Mysterious Substance. Chapter 2360, Mysterious Substance. According to my deductions, this should be a substance that is inclined towards the spirit, Wally said. He continued to scan that substance with green light. This was the second time. Ling Han was surprised. There is actually something in this world that you don't know. That is natural. Wally was very humble. Who knows how many realms there are in the Genesis world? I have only just ventured to a high-level dimension, and every realm has its own unique traits, though a considerable number of heaven and earth would be similar. Ling Han shook the palm civet in his grip. Can this thing be eaten? Would they also go mad if they consumed it? As long as you don't touch this thing, it will be fine, Wally said, pointing at the gray substance. Ling Han cracked a grin. Then let's eat. They started a fire and roasted the meat, eating this palm civet. For better or worse, it was still at the 8th lotus, so its flesh was delicious. Furthermore, it contained an abundance of energy, which would be slightly beneficial for their cultivation. Finally, Ling Han carefully removed that layer of gray substance, planning to take it into the Black Tower. Yet he suddenly discovered that he could not enter into the Black Tower. It was not like that scroll that could not be stowed in the Black Tower, but rather he himself had also been refused entry. This thing is extremely dangerous. Small Tower's voice rang out. It would very possibly corrode my consciousness and cause me to head towards destruction. What? Only now did Ling Han get a true shock. What was the Black Tower? A precious tool of a heavenly venerate. But Small Tower was actually wary of this gray thing as well, and was unwilling to take it in, which would be equivalent to taking poison. But what poison could kill the precious tool of a heavenly venerate? Clearly, Ling Han had underestimated how frightening this substance could be. What exactly is this thing? Even Wally doesn't know, and even Small Tower is afraid of it. Ling Han mumbled. The whole Golden Clouds Mountain should be filled with this kind of substance, but even ordinary cultivators would not be affected as long as they did not get in contact with it for a long time. Why was this the case? The level of quality is too high, but because there is not enough quantity, the influence has decreased, he guessed. Right when Ling Han was pondering, he discovered that the gray substance was actually dispersing and soon vanished completely. It cannot stay for long outside of a living creature, but I can feel that it has not truly vanished, but has rather been reassimilated into this place. Ling Han raised his head to look at the erupting volcano. What exactly is this place? Whatever place this was, since they were already here, they should naturally search high and low for chaos source rocks. Small Tower had previously set its eye on them, so they were clearly extremely valuable. They roamed around on the mountain, and gradually went deeper and deeper. This was a very silent place, and even stepping on a leaf could produce a very loud sound. Sha! 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 They walked onwards, yet suddenly stopped. Only a while later, light appeared ahead of them. This was a man of the angel race. It was Feng Haowan. Feng Haowan clearly had not expected he would encounter Ling Han here. Killing intent flashed across his face, but he immediately hid it. Releasing a humph, he strode off. Killing intent flashed across Ling Han's face as well. If it were not for the fact that he knew that the divine sense of 2 heavenly venerates were here and could sweep over at any time, he would definitely chase after and kill this guy. After witnessing Xue Ji's cruelty, Ling Han knew they were all the same, whether they were demon race, angel race, holy beasts, or insect race. He could not think that they were kind just because the angel race and holy beasts had not invaded the celestial realm. There will eventually be a chance, Ling Han thought. They continued walking on the mountain and would occasionally encounter berserk wild beasts, wild men, insect race members, and so on. Whatever they encountered, the latter was incredibly mad and existed only for the purpose of slaughter. Ling Han and his group could deal with most enemies. Little Terror was also an incredibly powerful existence, and it could offer some resistance even against a 9th Lotus Third Leaf opponent. Could it be that Ascending Origin Tier has no pinnacle level? Ling Han asked Small Tower. Ascending Origin Tier is the transition into Celestial King Tier, to convert the origin power in one's body into source power. There are 3 minor levels: small accomplishment, great accomplishment, and consummate, and every time you complete tempering and compression, it means that you have advanced to the next minor level. Small Tower offered a very detailed explanation this time. 3 times later, the origin power should be completely converted to source power, reaching a consummate state. If you are unable to reach the consummate level even after 3 times, you will have to do it again. And if you consume some specific natural treasures, you may be able to reach the consummate level in a single stroke. Realization dawned on Ling Han. In other words, the 3 minor levels of ascending origin tier have no clear dividing line. In truth, it depends on the purity level of source power. By the time you reach 100%, that would be perfection. Small Tower laughed. This was its trademark mockery. Ling Han did not take it to heart. No wonder that no matter how strong an ascending origin tier was, they could not possibly compare to a celestial king tier, because this cultivation level was only a transition, converting origin power into source power. In terms of height of regulations, they completely could not compare to celestial kings. Hence, they could not possibly reach or even surpass the level of celestial kings. However, as long as I advance to the ascending origin tier and use void particle energy to temper myself further, there is a chance that I can match celestial king tier. He couldn't help but be filled with anticipation. To battle or even kill celestial kings as an ascending origin tier would have to be very shocking, right? Waha, here is another rock. Hunyo suddenly called out loudly in excitement. Another burning rock had indeed appeared ahead of them, but it was close to being extinguished. Clearly, this fire would not continuously burn. Instead, there was still a limit. Ling Han extinguished the flames and then stowed the rock into the Black Tower, in no rush to refine it. They continued traveling. They were not the only brave people in this deep mountainous area. There were other elites, such as the disciples from the Heavenly Venerate Yellow Springs line. But this Heavenly Venerate was different from the Heavenly Venerate Desolate Eternity. He did not have the habit of taking disciples widely, but rather only had a mere 3. Aside from Liao Kong, the others were actually the Heavenly Venerate Yellow Springs' first disciple, second disciple, or his grand disciples. Ling Han and his group battled with wild beasts and battled with others as well. 2 months' time passed in the blink of an eye. They retreated from the mountainous area first to prevent their consciousness from being affected, as it had turned them bloodthirsty and hungering for slaughter. Even Small Tower was wary of that substance, so Ling Han no longer had the confidence that he could duck inside the Black Tower and hide. They arrived outside the mountainous area. While waiting for the grayish substance in their bodies to slowly disappear, they began cultivating with the Chaos Source rocks. This time, they had collected a total of 17 Chaos Source rocks, which differed in size. The largest was as big as a grindstone, but the smallest was only the size of a fist. However, size was not the only basis for judging the quality of a Chaos Source rock. The purity level of the source power within was another factor. Some rocks, while being large in size, did not contain much source power and couldn't compare to even a fist-sized rock. "The volcano has stopped erupting," someone suddenly exclaimed. Ling Han and the others raised their heads and looked upwards. Indeed, the volcano that had been constantly erupting had already stopped, no longer gushing flames and lava outwards. In their place, there were multiple black clouds that were incredibly dense and soaring skywards. This naturally led to another tsunami wave of entering into the mountainous area to contend for resources, because there would no longer be any outpour of Chaos Source rocks, so every single one collected meant one less. Ling Han did not enter the mountain again. He checked himself, and there was actually not much of the grayish substance left. It was slightly influencing his emotions. Thankfully, after exiting the mountainous area, this kind of substance was also slowly decreasing. But if he climbed the mountain now, that would merely be courting death. Chapter 2361, Ascending Origin Tier. Chapter 2361, Ascending Origin Tier. A few months later, the contest on Golden Cloud's mountain finally came to an end. Everyone left. Liao Kong had been responsible for taking them here, but definitely did not have the leisure and time to take them all back. In any case, it was just a few years' journey, so they could just travel at their own pace. Ling Han was in no rush to leave, but rather decided to stay for a while longer. He was extremely curious about this mountain. What exactly was that gray substance that it could drive living beings mad, and even the precious tool of a heavenly venerate would be wary of it? Was it also at the heavenly venerable tier? The gray substance inside his body had already dispersed completely. Thus, he went into the mountainous area again, and only left when he felt that he was close to madness. Another 5 months later, Ling Han returned to normal. "You are playing with fire," Wally said. "Though this kind of mysterious substance would disperse, its effects on you are permanent. I can be certain that you will not be able to come back out again if you enter a few more times." Only now did Ling Han get a terrifying shock. He had not thought it would actually be so dangerous. He thought for a while, and decided that he should set this matter aside first. After he had advanced into the Celestial King tier, he would take another look at the summit. He was a curious person. Without getting to the bottom of this, he would not be able to rest easy. Ling Han, Hunyao, and the Empress embarked on a journey to return to Divine, Desolate Mountain. On their way, the two women would occasionally cultivate with the Chaos Source rocks in their arms. They had both cultivated the greatest eternity, everlasting physique. They themselves could turn into the flow of time, and there was no need at all for them to use the time cultivation chamber. But even if they were all monarch stars and had already reached the peak stage of the immortal palace tier at that, converting and forming the first bit of source power was as difficult as ascending the heavens. It was the same even for Ling Han. This required accumulation of energy over an extended period of time, but just how long had they been at this level? Cultivating to the late stage would require accumulation of energy over a long time, especially when it was advancing to the next major tier. That could not be rushed at all. However, the three of them, including Bewitching Maiden Row, had cultivated a time celestial physique, though Bewitching Maiden Rose was slightly weaker. A year passed in the outside world, but they had already been cultivating for 100, even 1,000 years. For years later, they returned to Divine, Desolate Mountain. It had taken a year longer than they had planned. That was because they made several stops on the way, which affected their speed. This time because Ling Han had cultivated the secret technique of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity. He was no longer affected by the mist and easily ascended the mountain. They had not thought that they were actually not the last batch to return. Shui Go, Jing Zhongyue, Huai Jian, and the others were still on their way. Out of the 5 newly joined disciples, only Ling Han and Su Xing had returned. Ling Han was not concerned about the matters of others. He continued to cultivate while he looked for a chance to save another batch of humans. 9 days later, Shui Ge returned, but it caused a considerable commotion. Not only had he advanced into the 9th lotus, he had even reached the height of 2nd leaf at that. This was too shocking. How could it possibly be so fast? Wasn't cultivation level slowly tempered bit by bit? Only afterwards did Ling Han find out that Shui Ji's race enjoyed devouring the blood essence of living creatures, which they would usually store up in their bodies, and after breaking through to the 9th lotus, that blood essence would be dissolved, turning into waves of energy and helping them to spike their cultivation levels. There was only a one-time opportunity. However, those with weaker natural talent would only be able to advance from the early stage of the 9th lotus first leaf to the middle stage at most. But Shui Ge was much more impressive. In a single stroke, he had charged up to 2nd leaf, which was chillingly powerful. As expected of a supreme monarch star whose evolution index was close to or had even reached 11. This burst was really too terrifying. The first thing that Shui Gu did upon his return was to issue a challenge to Ling Han. He had held back for too long. Previously, Ling Han had punched him in the face for no rhyme or reason, yet no one had stood up for him, so he had repressed his anger. The fact that he was able to rush up to such a high cultivation level was because he really held too much resentment in his heart, which turned into powerful motivation for him. Otherwise, the explosion of blood essence was extremely painful, so he would have long since given up. Ling Han considered for a while and agreed to a spar with him, setting the time for 10 days later. He had the confidence that he could advance into the ascending origin tier within 10 days' time. But even if he had reached small accomplishment level of the ascending origin tier, it would be very hard for him to match Shui Gu. Ascending origin tier aside, the latter was also a supreme monarch star, and his heaven-defying trait was not inferior to Ling Han in any way. However, Ling Han could still extract void particle energy. Once the upper limits to ascending origin tier was lifted, just what kind of height would he be able to reach? Consummate level of the ascending origin tier, or even stronger? He was very expectant. Shui Gu had no disagreement about this, either. 10 days, time was too short. Even with time acceleration effects, it would be no more than some 30 years. At most, Ling Han would be able to complete the breakthrough to 9th Lotus. But compared with him, there was still a very wide gap. It should be known that the extreme burst after advancing into 9th Lotus was the unique ability of their race. He was certain and confident that he would cripple Ling Han. 3 days later, Jing Zhongyue also returned. She had successfully advanced into 9th Lotus and had reached the middle stage 9th Lotus first leaf at that. Though she could not compare to Shui Gu, it was still very shocking. Clearly, she had also encountered an amazing fated opportunity. Another 2 days later, Huai Jian returned. His cultivation level had also improved greatly, reaching the late stage of the 9th Lotus first leaf. Apparently, he had obtained a great fortune on Golden Clouds Mountain and obtained a chaos source rock with an astonishing purity level. But neither of them could compare to Shui Gu. Previously, the 5 Supreme Monarch Star were practically on equal levels with one another. Yet now there was a clear difference among them. Shui Gu had left them all behind in the dust, and the cultivation level of Ling Han, who had previously been strongest, was now the lowest, but no one dared to underestimate him. After all, this guy's body art was heaven-defyingly strong. And Ling Han was still burying himself in cultivation. He left his quarters, but was still on the divine, desolate mountain. This mountain was really too extensive and wide. An earth-shaking change was presently happening inside his body. He now knew why it was so difficult to condense source power. To use an analogy, origin power was in gaseous form, while source power was in liquid form. What he had to do was to liquefy origin power. In this process, the intensity of origin power would increase many times over, and a drop of source power would be able to explode with terrifying power. However, it was similarly extraordinarily difficult to compress origin power. In a moment of carelessness, he could explode himself into bits first. After thousands of failed attempts, Ling Han finally gained some certainty. Hong, long, long, origin power roared. It naturally was not willing to be compressed and erased, and was filled with resistance. Yet Ling Han ignored it. After strongly suppressing it, bit after bit of origin power was compressed together, reaching the extent of 100,000 bits. Ordinarily speaking, 10,000 bits of origin power was enough to be compressed into a drop of source power, but Ling Han was ambitious. If 100,000 bits of origin power were compressed together, he would be able to take a very big step in the ascending origin tier. He compressed it to his best efforts. Originally, origin power had no form, but being compressed under 100,000-fold, it was forcefully turned into mist. If he went another step further, the mist could condense into liquid. Ling Han roared internally. Wang, the mist condensed completely, and a single drop of liquid as formed quietly. Source power was condensed. The ascending origin tier. Ling Han's eyes suddenly snapped open, instantly releasing an astonishing light, as if his gaze could penetrate Thorug the heaven and earth. Kwang! Thunderclouds gathered densely in the skies. The heavenly tribulation was here. Though he had only condensed his first drop of source power, taking this step meant a qualitative change, allowing him to advance into a new level. With a battle cry, he roared at the skies in fury, unafraid of the heavenly tribulation. Come on then. He took out that scroll that could not be opened and channeled Wally's unique cultivation technique, extracting the power from within. Instantly, an even more frightening might of tribulation surged out. Ling Han stopped while he was ahead and extracted a bit of power to temper himself. He stopped immediately. Once his ascending origin tier, heavenly tribulation, became a heavenly venerable tier, heavenly tribulation, he would definitely be dead. Chapter 2362, Beaten Until Bursting. Chapter 2362, Beaten Until Bursting. Once Ling Han advanced into the ascending origin tier, his vitality index would spike and unlock his room for evolution. Void particle energy could temper the body, and his physical power began to soar. The advancement of cultivation level should be very, very slow. It was the process of cooking soup over a slow fire. However, void particle energy was the essence energy of a Genesis world, far surpassing the height of regulations. If this was used to temper a ninth lotus being, the effects would naturally be spectacular. Ling Han's physical power began to soar. It had initially only been comparable to the early stage of consummate level of the ascending origin tier, yet it now leaped all the way to the middle stage, and the rate of advancement showed no signs of slowing down either. Crack! 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 Thunderclouds spread out densely, bolts of lightning striking madly, turning into multiple giants of lightning as they launched a mad barrage on Ling Han. But for someone with Ling Han's physique, this was completely negligible. Under the tempering of void particle energy, Ling Han's indestructible heaven scroll also released a greater might, increasing the toughness of his physique. As Ling Han battled the heavenly tribulation fiercely, he roamed at the edge of the cliff, continuously absorbing void particle energy and increasing his physical power and improving physique. A day later, the heavenly tribulation had passed, but the thunderclouds had still not dispersed. They were still occasionally building up and dissolving. This was because Ling Han was still using void particle energy to strengthen himself. The level of this energy was too high. Every once in a while, Ling Han's strength would increase a bit, and it was a practically visible rate. It was really too fast. When the deadline of 10 days arrived, only then did he stop with slight dissatisfaction. He was engrossed in the enjoyment of increasing his strength, and to suddenly stop now made him feel a slight dejection. My present body art should have surpassed the peak stage of consummate level of the ascending origin tier. Ling Han deduced internally. According to Wally's vitality index, I should be around 4,300 points or so, but there is still some distance from 5,000 points. If one's vitality index reached 5,000, they would be a celestial king. Ling Han returned and did not go to his quarters, but rather headed directly to Sword Manifestation Peak. This was the highest and steepest mountain of divine desolate mountains. From afar, it looked like a solitary sword that was stabbing into the clouds. Ling Han strode forwards, getting faster and faster. He did not use the slightest bit of power of regulation, but as he stepped out, he naturally surged with frightening power of regulation. Space seemed to have been forcefully compressed, and every step he took was equivalent to a boundless distance. Pung, 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 he barged all the way over without stopping at all. All the mountain rocks that blocked his way were crushed into dust. Ling Han released a battle cry, his voice ringing out like a heavy hammer, so resounding that bits of rocks were bouncing in the mountains before they, too, were shattered. He ascended Sword Manifestation Peak, and after traveling quickly for a long while, his steps finally slowed down as he strolled casually like a normal person. About an hour later, Ling Han arrived at the summit. There was a massive platform here. Initially, this had been a sharp summit, but it had been sliced off. It should be a deliberate move, so it could be used for battle. A considerable number of people were already standing around the platform. The Empress and the other women, with little Terror still curled up in bewitching Maiden Rose arms, Huai Jian, Jing Zhongyue, Zishuang, and the others. Practically all the disciples that had reached Ninth Lotus had arrived. Xue Ge was very anxious to get his revenge, so it was natural that he had arrived much earlier. He still maintained the image of a bald man of great build. His arms were crossed behind his back, and as the mountain breeze blew, the robes he wore rustled loudly. "You are quite late," he declared coldly. Ling Han grinned, so eager to be beaten. "Huh?" Xue Ge laughed drily, yet his laughter held no amusement. "Could it be that you still do not know my current cultivation level?" A lotus flower bloomed on his forehead, possessing 9 petals and 2 leaves that were as black as ink. "I am a 9th lotus second leaf. What about you?" Now that they had confirmed Xue Ji's cultivation level was truly 9th lotus second leaf, those like Feng Hailwan and Si Huangyin all had grim expressions. In terms of cultivation level, they had already been surpassed by this young junior brother. Ling Han smiled calmly, and a lotus flower similarly appeared on his forehead. It also had 9 petals, but only held a single leaf, and this leaf was extremely blurry at that, almost unformed. Huai Jian and the others were naturally clear. Ling Han had indeed had some improvement, advancing into the 9th lotus, but only had the cultivation level of the early stage of the 9th lotus first leaf. In fact, it was the early stage of the early stage at that. The gap in cultivation level was clear to see. Previously, they were at the same starting line, but now Xue Ji's leading advantage was already incredibly apparent. "I can still beat you till you burst," Ling Han said. "What wild boasting!" Xue Ge smirked coldly. He knew that Ling Han's body art was amazing, with battle prowess reaching peak stage 9th lotus second leaf, or even 9th lotus third leaf. But Xue Ge? He was a supreme monarch star, with battle prowess directly soaring to the late stage, or even peak stage of the 9th lotus third leaf. "Bah, you have been too arrogant. I will definitely make you return what you owe me." Xiu, his figure charged out as fast as lightning. Ling Han was calm, casually shooting out a punch. Pum, pum, pum. He seemed to be neither too fast nor too slow, yet every punch just happened to block Xue Ji's attacks, and he did not fall into the slightest bit of disadvantage. What? Everyone watched, their eyes wide with shock. How could this be? They were both supreme monarch stars. In that case, as long as one had an advantage in cultivation level, they would definitely be able to obtain victory in battle. Ling Han released a battle cry, lightning wrapping around his fists. This was something that he had come up with by fusing regulations and body art together, unleashing an even more terrifying destructive power. His movements were wide and obvious, the black lotus flower on his forehead swaying, as if it had come to life. This time, Ling Han had absolutely no interest in playing with Xue, Ge move by move. The moment he started, it was his full battle prowess unleashed, suppressing Xue Ge completely. Everyone could not speak. Ling Han's strength was inconceivable to them. He had clearly just advanced into the 9th lotus, yet his battle prowess had reached the peak stage of the 9th lotus third leaf, and was in fact just that bit stronger even. In that case, when he reached the 9th lotus third leaf, wouldn't he be able to clash even with an ancestral king? Xue Ge roared in fury. His expression was filled with disbelief. He had obtained such amazing improvement in a single stroke, yet was still no match for Ling Han. Furthermore, he had always been brimming with confidence, thinking that he could win easily and vent his fury. Who would have expected that reality was completely contrary to his expectations? He took his original form, a mere blood insect that was less than a foot long. Xiao, xiao, xiao! It was like he was flying with how amazingly fast he bounced as he attempted to break through the limit of what Ling Han could trace visually with his movements. However, this was all completely wasted effort. By now, Ling Han could battle with his body art, his movements keeping on track with his wishes. There was no need for him to draw on regulations at all, so the speed of his attack would be just that bit faster than that of an opponent of the same cultivation level. Though it was just a slight bit, could a monarch star afford this minor gap? Pung! Ling Han's punch landed on the blood insect. Though the target's surface was small, the power of his fist was too overbearing, forcefully pummeling the blood insect and causing to throw up a mist of blood. Shui Go was in so much pain that he released an incredibly agonizing wave through his divine sense. Ling Han did not quit while he was ahead. Who asked this guy to provoke him? If this was not divine Desolate Mountain, he would definitely deal a fatal blow and directly erase this damn insect. Enough, enough! Everyone hurriedly approached to mediate. Ling Han shot a few more punches, and only then did he stop. After stopping the fight, when everyone looked towards Ling Han, their gazes were completely different. This was a strong rival that they could not just circle around. With Ling Han there, a large portion of any future cultivation resources would definitely be going to him. Meanwhile, Zishuang was very regretful. If she had known, she would have formed an alliance with Ling Han. Now, if she spoke of this matter, it would be Ling Han who was stronger, and she would be the weaker party, so she would definitely have to make great sacrifices should they discuss conditions. Chapter 2363, you are? Chapter 2363, you are. Ling Han and the women returned, but the four of them very soon left their quarters together again. Hunyao, the Empress, and bewitching Maiden Ro were about to break through. In the remote wilderness of the mountains, the three women broke through respectively, while Ling Han continued to extract the void particle energy from within that scroll, pushing his physical power further upwards. A day later, the three women had completed their breakthrough one after another, and advanced into the ascending origin tier. They were now one step closer to the celestial king tier. They were in no rush to return. Ling Han had the three women continue attempting to absorb the energy inside the mysterious scroll, but they had not truly come into contact with the power of heaven and earth yet, and even with Wally's cultivation technique, they still did not have the slightest idea how to go about it. It was just like an artist that had never seen a tiger before. No matter how the tiger's appearance was described to him, there was no way he could draw a lifelike tiger. Ling Han could only sigh in pity, but it was fine. As long as the three women could become ninth heaven celestial kings, there was still a chance that they could absorb the essence energy of the Genesis world, thus stepping into the ranks of heavenly venerates. Both Hunyao and the Empress would definitely become ninth heaven celestial kings, but it was not so certain for bewitching Maiden Ro. However, Ling Han had no plans to turn her into their main contributor of battle prowess, either. In a flash, 13 years had already passed. Ling Han continued to use void particle energy to temper himself, already cultivating his body arts to the pinnacle of this cultivation level. According to Wally, his present vitality index was 4,424 points, already exceeding the third leaf of the ninth lotus by a great amount. And after waiting for so many years, the commotion that rose up from kidnapping the human slaves finally quieted down. The two ancestral kings returned once more to their usual routines, and did not continue to stand guard day after day, night after night. Ling Han found another chance. When that sliver of divine sense of the heavenly venerate desolate eternity left once more, which he even confirmed with Wally, he immediately executed his operations. This time he was even stronger, so the speed at which he kidnapped them was naturally faster. After merely over an hour, he had taken all the humans into the Black Tower without alerting anyone. He returned casually. However, when he had traveled halfway, he suddenly discovered a white figure had appeared ahead of him. This was a person, but his features and even build could not be discerned at all. He was clearly just standing right there, so this was extremely bizarre. He should be an elite. Could it be that his previous actions had been witnessed by this person? Yet why had he waited here for Ling Han then? "Young man, you are very brave," this figure said. "I don't know what you are talking about." Ling Han's heart steadied. As long as heavenly venerate desolate eternity was not here, there was no one that could discover the Black Tower inside his body, so they naturally would not be able to catch him red-handed. A thief had to be caught in the act. Ling Han could completely push the blame off of himself and deny everything. The white figure laughed loudly, and after laughing for a very long while, he finally said, "Young man, why have you kidnapped so many humans?" Ling Han's heart clenched, but he showed nothing in his expression as he replied, "I don't know what nonsense you are blabbering. I saw you take those humans into your spatial god tool with my very own eyes. Don't say that I saw wrong. That is impossible," the white figure said. Instantly, killing intent rose up in Ling Han's heart. In the first place, he was enemies with the foreign realm. Since this person had discovered his secret, the only option was to kill him. "Xiao!" Ling Han charged out, summoning the divine demon sword directly. He delivered a sword strike, but it was soundless and negligible, not releasing the slightest bit of light. But accompanied by his astonishing physical power, it could unleash a terrifying destructive power. The sword strike swept out, and Ling Han passed through the white figure. With how sharp the divine demon sword was, it actually did not cause the slightest bit of damage. You are indeed a very lucky brat to actually have gained a celestial tool." The white figure appeared slightly surprised. Yet Ling Han was even more stunned. The other party said celestial tool and not ancestral weapon. What did this signify? Devouring metal, right? The white figure laughed. This kind of divine metal has a strong ability to grow, and divine metal is not its strongest. In the future, it could be forged into a heavenly venerable tier tool. What astonishing insight! Ling Han was shocked. Could it be that the precious tools of heavenly venerates were all forged from devouring metal? Otherwise, divine metal would be the final result. How would they find material that was even stronger than divine metal? No need to be nervous, no need to be nervous. If I bore malicious intentions towards you, how could I possibly be speaking with you here? The white figure laughed, and actually turned around to comfort Ling Han. However, his next words caused Ling Han to break out in a cold sweat. "You come from the celestial realm, right?" Ling Han's first reaction was to activate the Black Tower and then flee immediately with the three women. But something instinctively told him that he should not be so rash. Though this person's features were hidden, he possessed an intimidatingly strong aura. If this kind of being had wanted to target him, he would not have given him the chance to activate the Black Tower at all. He would have long since attacked. "Who are you, senior?" Ling Han did not admit nor deny it. The white figure laughed, and then sighed slowly as he said, "Like you, I too come from the celestial realm." Ling Han's heart trembled as he asked, "Could it be that Senior is one of the earliest people to be brought into the foreign realm?" "Something like that," the white figure replied, his voice slightly bleak. Ling Han was shocked. Then the other had surely been in the foreign realm for a considerable number of epochs by now. He had to have had a very difficult time. "Tell me, brat, why have you come here?" the white figure asked. Ling Han's thoughts raced. There was definitely no way he could be so trusting. This person did not even show his face, and he was supposed to believe him? However, intuition told him that he should speak the truth. Firstly, the other had indeed discerned his true identity, so there already would not be much meaning if Ling Han planned to deceive him by saying he was a guest from the celestial realm. He considered for a moment, and only then related how he had been compelled by the heavenly venerates of the celestial realm, and thus could only flee to the foreign realm. After the white figure heard this, he sank into silence, and after a long while he finally said, Ju Wu and sealed emotion, they are indeed still as cold and heartless as they had been. For the sake of their own transcendence, they have already abandoned everything. Ling Han's heart throbbed wildly, hearing the tone that the white figure spoke in. He seemed to be on the same level as Ju heavenly venerate and sealed emotion, heavenly venerable. A heavenly venerate of the celestial realm. He suddenly startled. This guy couldn't be the karmic life, heavenly venerable, right? Everyone said that the karmic life, heavenly venerable, had faced off against 9 heavenly venerates on his own, resisting the 9 heavenly venerates of the foreign realm, and had even used his own body to crash into the connecting point of the 2 realms in his state of severe injury, granting peace to the celestial realm for a considerable number of epochs. However, what if this guy had not died and had even been captured and brought here by the heavenly venerates of the foreign realm? No, if he was really the karmic life, heavenly venerable, how could he stand here completely nonchalant like this? Dare I ask for senior's title? Ling Han asked cautiously, though he was filled with anticipation. A good many epochs ago, I did indeed have a title, and that was Wu Lu. The white figure laughed, but Ling Han could discern the bitterness in his laughter. After he finished laughing, he paused and repeated, Heavenly venerate Wu Lu. Pooh! Ling Han instantly spluttered. This white figure was actually a heavenly venerate, and a heavenly venerate of the celestial realm at that. This was completely illogical. Come, I will relate the exact details of the matter to you. I, too, need your help in this matter, or I would not have taken such a great risk to meet you, heavenly venerate Wu Lu said. If you cannot accomplish this task, the celestial realm will really be done for.